Chapter 2296 Tempted. Chapter 2296 Tempted. Upon appearing in heaven and earth, the divine demon's sword pulsed with a chilling glimmer, and radiated with an overwhelming murderous aura. Ling Han roared as he charged forward with sword in hand. The giant insect was unaware of the divine demon's sword's might, so it was fearless as it faced Ling Han's attack head-on. Its shell was indeed hard to crack. Without weapons, those at the same cultivation level would be unable to wound it. Ling Han slashed down, causing a brilliant sword light to soar into the air. It was as if he were opening the sky. Pooh! The sword light sank into the giant insect's body, piercing it from one end and leaving from the other. Its radiance illuminated the sky. Ling Han dashed past, and the body of the large insect was immediately separated into two. Green blood sprayed through the air as its life force was extinguished. Everyone was speechless with shock. What was going on? Ling Han had clearly been at an absolute disadvantage, yet he had instantly turned the tables after retrieving his sword? In fact, he had achieved victory in a single strike? This was simply unfathomable. Moreover, Ling Han was only at the 5th leaf of the 6th lotus, yet he could kill an opponent at the 4th leaf of the 7th lotus in the blink of an eye. Was the cultivation level limit still effective against him? Even the iron rule of the cultivation world had become trash. Ling Han swung his sword several more times, dismembering the giant insect. He found a fist-sized emerald green orb in its heart. This was the core of the giant insect's power, and he could extract the power from within it. As for the insect's flesh, Ling Han and the others naturally wouldn't consider it. They wouldn't touch it unless they were starving to death. Brother Ba, how impressive! Celestial Maiden Yunho was rendered speechless. This person's might had already reached an indescribable level. And that sword. It had destroyed the insect's tough shell in a single slash. It was also unbelievably powerful. This sword is incredible, they all exclaimed in their minds. When Ling Han drew the sword, they all felt a mysterious chill running down their spines. It was as if their skin were being sliced. Their hearts thumped, and their bodies shuddered. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "We can climb the mountain now." He was the first to set off, closely followed by the Empress and the others. They were already accustomed to Ling Han's freakish power. As for the others, they were still feeling dazed as they blankly followed after Ling Han. They were like mindless puppets being dragged along by a string. Even though Celestial Maiden Yunho was following Ling Han, she was so dazed that she didn't know where she was placing her feet as she walked. There was only Ling Han in her eyes. Even though this demon was extremely ugly and as crude as a pig, she truly couldn't deny his talent in cultivation. Monarch tears at the 5th leaf of the 6th lotus could at most only rival or defeat those at the 1st leaf of the 7th lotus. If they came across someone at the 2nd leaf of the 7th lotus, their only fate would be defeat. This was an iron rule. This was the advantage of one major tier. However, not only could Ling Han easily defeat those at the 2nd leaf and 3rd leaf of the 7th lotus, he had even managed to kill an insect at the 4th leaf of the 7th lotus with a single slash. His immense power caused her heart to flutter. How could monarch tears be so powerful? In fact, even monarch stars weren't so powerful. After all, could a monarch star at the 9th leaf of the 7th lotus defeat someone at the 4th leaf of the 8th lotus? This was not to mention achieving victory in a single strike. She was a prodigious woman, so her standards were naturally as high as could be. Only monarch stars could tempt her heart. However, if they truly courted her, she would still be reserved and consider their character first. Now, however, her body couldn't help but feel hot with excitement whenever she thought about Ling Han's power. A mysterious current of warmth flowed through her body, and she could barely stop herself from leaping into his embrace. She wanted to experience his passionate kiss, his rough fondling, and even the weight of his body on hers as he forcefully. She suddenly jolted awake. She had actually become such a pervert. That's a detestable demon. He's as ugly as a pig. Look at that crimson-red skin, those terrible horns, those strong arms. If he embraces me, I'll definitely be filled with a sense of safety. Pay! Pay! Pei! Celestial Maiden Yinha hurriedly clasped her head with her hands. Her thoughts had wandered off again. She sighed in her mind. Unfortunately, she had fallen for this barbaric man from the demon race. They set off for the Holy Mountain. However, their journey was destined to be troublesome, and they quickly came across a golden bear. It was only 30 centimeters tall, and it looked incredibly adorable. However, it was extremely vicious, and it immediately swung its claws upon seeing them. A projection of its claws became tangible as it slashed toward them like a blade. However, the cultivation of this golden bear wasn't high, and it was eventually defeated by bewitching Maiden Ro. However, she didn't kill it, and she instead planned to take it as a pet. Afterward, they came across a holy deer. This beast had the lower body of a deer and the upper body of a human. Its strength was astonishing, and even after retrieving his divine demon sword, Ling Han was still unable to defeat it. In the end, they could only flee in disarray. The gulf between their cultivation had been far too large. As a result, even Ling Han had been helpless. After they fled for 3 days and 3 nights, the holy deer finally gave up on its pursuit. With a flap of its wings, it started flying back to where it had come from. Stinky deer! Nio is definitely going to eat you! Hu Nio shouted in anger. Ling Han wiped the cold sweat from his brow. The divine demon sword wasn't omnipotent. The holy deer had been far too powerful, giving him no chance to strike it with his sword. Thus, the divine demon sword was useless regardless of how powerful it was. Of course, this was unless the level of the divine demon sword equaled or even surpassed that of the holy deer. At that time, killing it would be like killing a chicken. Otherwise, weapons would only be inanimate objects, regardless of how sharp they were. There was nothing more Ling Han could do. The regulations of the celestial realm within the divine demon sword couldn't be channeled, so it could only stay at the same level as Ling Han. Of course, if it weren't for the divine demon sword, perhaps they could have still escaped, but it would have been very likely that several of them would have died. In fact, they might have even consumed several life-saving treasures. They rested for several days. During this time, they also had a huge meal to replenish their energy. They then set off for the Holy Mountain again. However, that holy deer had seemingly set its eyes on them, and it unexpectedly started to attack them again. Ling Han and the others had no option but to flee in disarray again. This occurred time and time again. In the end, half a year passed, yet Ling Han and the others still hadn't managed to enter the Holy Mountain. This caused them to feel extremely frustrated. If they couldn't leave this place, their lifespan would only be a measly 800 to 1,000 years. They could count their days on their fingers. As mighty 6 Lotus Emperor Tears and Monarch Tears, they were actually going to die of old age? How vexing! They summarized their experiences and lessons. If they came across the holy deer again, they would flee toward the Holy Mountain no matter what. Otherwise, they would never be able to reach it. After deciding this, they set off again. Stop! Ling Han suddenly raised a hand. He had heard some slight movement. The long grass in the distance suddenly separated, revealing a group of people. Baoyu Jianhu! Celestial Maiden Yunha exclaimed. Her pupils contracted upon seeing him. She hadn't imagined that he would return. This was also because they had been trapped here for half a year. Otherwise, if everything had gone smoothly, they would have already obtained the secrets of the precious armor and left long ago. However, Ling Han's gaze was fixed on another person, a single-horned demon. He possessed a large physique, and his tail would occasionally lash around, causing even the air to become a ball of chaos. This person was extremely strong. Ha ha! We meet again, huh? Baoyu Jianhu roared with laughter. However, his voice was cold and dripping with malice. As it turned out, the Baoyu clan hadn't been overly interested in the ancient tomb. Even though it was rumored to be the tomb of an ancestral king, these were beings who were undying and indestructible. How could there be so many ancestral king tombs in the world? It was because of this that their team had been led by Baoyu Jianhu. He had come to investigate this situation first. If this place had truly been worth exploring, Baoyu who naturally wouldn't have been powerful enough to deal with the situation. As such, he would have returned to ask for assistance. However, to be kicked out before he had even entered? This infuriated the Baoyu clan. Chapter 2297 Transferring Misfortune. Chapter 2297 Transferring Misfortune. The single-horned demon stood up, sweeping its gaze across Ling Han and the others. His voice was calm as he said, "The demon can stay. The rest of you, cut off an arm and P*SS off." Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others were all enraged. This person was far too arrogant. Do you people want to die? A vicious glimmer flashed across the single-horned demon's eyes. This was a petrifying glimmer, and the angels couldn't help but feel their chests suddenly tightening. They felt like vomiting blood. This person was far too powerful. Perhaps he was an 8th Lotus elite. "Don't make me regret this. Hurry up and P*SS off," the single-horned demon said in a baleful voice. Ling Han's expression was solemn. This demon was extremely powerful. He couldn't be underestimated. He chuckled and asked, "How have we offended you? As a demon, you're actually mingling with these ugly angels? You've lost all of our face," the single-horned demon said in an icy voice. "For degenerates like you, I only offer a single punishment." He paused for a moment before saying in a voice filled with killing intent, "Death." Ling Han shrugged and said, "But I still haven't lived enough." "You're seeking death," the single-horned demon roared as it immediately charged forward. It pressed down with its hand, causing countless meteors to instantly plummet from the sky. This was a petrifying sight. Ling Han nodded in his mind. This person was indeed powerful. However, he was still far weaker than that holy deer. He retrieved his divine demon's sword to meet this attack. Whoosh! A burst of sword chi ripped through the sky. Pa 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 pa! The meteors that were crashing down on Ling Han instantly exploded into pieces. Meanwhile, the remaining meteors all slammed into the earth, causing the ground to continuously quake. A look of fervor appeared in the single-horned demon's eyes as he gazed at the sword in Ling Han's hands. "Brilliant sword! No matter how brilliant it is, it's still got nothing to do with you," Ling Han said with a loud laugh. He charged forward with sword in hand. "To fall into your hands? What a waste of a treasure," the single-horned demon said with a sneer. He unleashed projections with his palms, naturally not allowing the sword chi or the divine demon's sword to strike him. He simply pushed them aside with his attacks. His cultivation was far superior to Ling Han's, so he was confident that he could shake Ling Han to death with his attacks. He was convinced that Ling Han couldn't unleash the full power of the sword. This was indeed a good plan. With such a huge gulf between their cultivation, it was only natural that their battle prowess wasn't on the same level. However, he was surprised to discover that Ling Han's physique far exceeded his cultivation level. As such, the shock waves from his attacks were but a tickle for Ling Han. Only that holy deer had been able to truly threaten Ling Han. They continued to battle. The single-horned demon's expression transformed from disdainful to solemn. However, this quickly transformed into a deep frown. He had never come across a 6th Lotus cultivator so difficult to kill before. Was this person truly at the 6th Lotus? Even among those at the 7th Lotus, few people were so freakish. Right at this moment, a dark shadow suddenly fell over them. Ling Han and the others had already developed a subconscious reaction to this, and they all shouted, "Flee!" They instantly sprinted away, fleeing faster than hunted rabbits. In a stroke of fortune, they could use the people from the Baoyu clan to attract the attention of this holy beast. What good people! The single-horned demon involuntarily grimaced. Ling Han was actually fleeing just like this. He was fleeing? Fucking fleeing? He wanted to give chase, yet the dark shadow from above had already enveloped him. He looked up, only to see a holy deer. It had the lower body of a deer, and the upper body of a human. Right now, its arms were spread apart, and it was condensing numerous crackling white lightning orbs in its hands. Just a single glance at this holy deer sent cold chills down the single-horned demon's spine. Retreat! Hurry up and retreat! He shouted in panic. This holy deer was far too powerful. He couldn't rival it unless he unleashed his trump cards. Even then, however, he would only be able to defend. Trying to achieve victory would be as difficult as trying to ascend the heavens. This time, the holy deer didn't pursue Ling Han and the others. Instead, it focused its gaze on the demons from the Baoyu clan. Perhaps it had grown tired of its old playthings, so it wanted to play with some new toys. It started its hunt, forcing the single-horned demon to use his trump card. This was a fruit that allowed him to elevate his battle prowess. He could rival the holy beast without falling to a disadvantage. However, it was still impossible for him to achieve victory. Ling Han and the others took advantage of this opportunity to flee. Not long ago, they had already decided to flee toward the holy mountain no matter what. An hour passed, and they finally succeeded in making it to the foot of the holy mountain. They took their first step to climb the mountain. After taking this step, the scene before them immediately changed. The dazzling golden mountain surprisingly became dull and desolate. Black air rose from the ground, transforming into all kinds of eerie and uncanny shapes. This is the holy mountain? They all shook their heads. This was obviously a dead mountain. Let's go. They started to climb the mountain. Following the path described by the tribespeople, they eventually arrived at a valley. They then looked up. The valley was extremely steep, and it was surrounded by plunging cliffs. The floor of the valley was more so littered with razor-sharp stones. If it were only this, no one would worry too much. The problem was, however, that the gravity in this place was unexpectedly powerful. Even raising their feet was difficult. Once they fell, death was all but certain. In any case, why did they need to climb these cliffs? The answer was simple. If they wanted to transform these rough billets into pieces of precious armor, they needed to place them inside the faces of the cliffs. Why couldn't they place them at the foot of the cliffs? They could indeed do this. However, one couldn't forget that more than one tribe lived in this region. In order to obtain food, there would often be skirmishes or even full-blown wars among these tribes. Thus, if they placed the billets at the foot of the cliffs, would that not equate to gifting them to others? One had to realize that metal ores were an incredibly valuable commodity in this place. In fact, they were even more valuable than food. As such, they would all try their best to climb the faces of the cliff. They would then dig a hole in which they placed the rough billets. The higher up they dug the hole, the better their billets would be hidden, and the smaller the chance their valuables would be stolen by others. Ling Han and the others had no interest in the rough billets. Instead, they wanted to witness the secret behind how these billets evolved into precious treasures. They searched around the valley, trying to discover the reason behind the evolution of the billets. The tribespeople viewed the holy mountain with great respect and reverence, and this was clear from the name that they gave it. Thus, they naturally didn't dare to damage its environment. However, Ling Han and the others were different. They dug 1 meter deep, and if they needed to, they would even flatten this entire valley. However, the gravity here was far too powerful, so much so that even standing upright was a tiring task. This was not to mention the arduous task of wandering around and digging. Moreover, due to the powerful force of gravity, the body of the mountain was also extremely compact and solid. It would take them a great deal of time to carve off a single piece of stone. Perhaps they could indeed flatten this mountain. However, doing so would require 10,000 or even 100,000 years. More importantly, did they have so much time? Here, they would experience hunger, and they would also be restricted by age. At most, they could only live for 1,000 years. That being the case, could they waste so much time here? Then what could they do? If they didn't solve the secret of this valley, they naturally wouldn't be able to find the path to leave. At that time, they would truly die of old age in this place. Ling Han retrieved his divine demon sword and slashed at the mountain face. This was an eventual celestial tool, the sharpest and sturdiest thing in the world. The effects were evident. It wasn't long before he dug a hole that was large enough to fit a person. He entered this hole, and the others hurriedly followed after him. Perhaps this would be their road to survival. In this place, they all became like ordinary mortal beings. They were no longer tireless celestials. After digging for half a day, Ling Han's arms became extremely sore. He passed the divine demon sword to Hunyeo. Hunyeo was only able to dig for 6 hours before handing the sword to the Empress. The Empress was similarly only able to dig for 6 hours before handing the sword to Bewitching Maiden Ro. Bewitching Maiden Ro was far inferior to them, and she was only able to dig for 2 hours. Chapter 2298 Underground River. Chapter 2298 Underground River. They passed the sword around, and dug one after another. Ling Han wasn't afraid that they would steal his divine demon's sword. Firstly, he was the most powerful among them. Secondly, the divine demon's sword contained his martial intent. One would need to be at least several times more powerful than him if they wanted to erase his martial intent. Otherwise, the divine demon's sword would automatically attack them. Everyone heaped praise onto the divine demon's sword. Most of them were of the opinion that this sword was forged from precious metals at the 9th lotus. However, they didn't dare to consider the possibility of this sword being an ancestral weapon. A 6th lotus 5 leaves cultivator possessing an ancestral weapon? Was this a joke? Half a month passed, and it was coincidentally Ling Han's turn to do the digging. Crumble. There was a crashing sound as the crushed stone fell away from them instead of toward them. Ling Han faltered for a brief moment before being overcome with delight. This mountain was hollow in the middle, and he had dug into this area. He slashed several more times with the divine demon's sword, carving out a hole that was large enough for a single person to pass. He released his divine sense to scout the area first. The entire center of the mountain was empty. It was a gigantic cavern, and if Ling Han stepped in from the entrance that he had created, he would plummet into a bottomless abyss. Even if the bottom weren't filled with blade-like rocks, he would still shatter all of his bones on impact. After all, the pull of gravity here was far too strong. It was like a blade that rested above everyone's head. Ling Han explained the situation to everyone. Upon hearing this, they all became solemn. Ling Han drew Hunyeo, the Empress, and Bewitching Maiden Ro into the Black Tower before entering the cavern, and climbing down the cliff. In fact, the others wanted to enter Ling Han's spatial god tool as well. However, they were too embarrassed to ask, so they could only descend the cliff by themselves. Moreover, they wouldn't dare to enter the spatial god tool of other people anyway. This was because they wouldn't understand the situation outside at all. What if they suddenly wanted to come out to take a look, but they still hadn't arrived on solid ground yet? Wouldn't they fall to death? The trust between them hadn't reached such a high level yet. Ling Han descended for a long time. In terms of distance, he had already made it dozens of kilometers below ground. However, the gravity here was far too strong. As a result, the speed of his descent was also extremely low. Otherwise, could he not cover a distance of dozens of kilometers in the blink of an eye? This place was pitch black, and he couldn't see anything more than 1 meter away from him. Meanwhile, his divine sense was also affected by the strong gravity, meaning that he couldn't observe things too far into the distance. Things were already difficult for him, so it was naturally even more torturous for the others. Fortunately, they had Ling Han to scout and lead the way. Otherwise, their descent would have been even slower. Perhaps it might have even been a dozen times slower. A feeling of vexation rose in Celestial Maiden in his mind. Why was Ling Han only willing to draw Hunyeo and the others into his spatial god tool? Why didn't he even ask her? The more she thought about this, the more aggrieved she became. In fact, there were already tears brimming in her eyes. Right at this moment, she suddenly heard Ling Han's delighted shout. "We're almost at the bottom!" Everyone was invigorated upon hearing this. They all stopped climbing to look down. They had been entirely focused on carefully descending just then, so how could they have had any spare effort to glance down? Thus, only at this moment did they discover the faint light below them. "We're finally at the bottom." They all breathed a sigh of relief. After descending for a moment, however, Ling Han suddenly furrowed his brows. This was because he could see the bottom clearly now. It was surprisingly an underground river. The speckles of light from just then had come from some unknown matter in this river. The river flowed silently. In fact, this was a harrowing silence. Ling Han explained the situation to the others before coming to a stop. He was still around 2 meters from the surface of the river. They all descended to the same height as Ling Han to stand beside him. However, not a single one of them entered the river. Who knew what the hell the river was filled with? What if it were a potent poison? Ling Han ignored the others as he retrieved some stone and metal from the Black Tower. He tossed them into the river one after another, observing to see if there were any unexpected reactions. Splash! Small ripples appeared in the river as the items splashed down and sank. As they were washed away, nothing strange occurred. Ling Han pondered for a moment before retrieving a small tree to toss into the river. The Black Tower was massive, so he could place all kinds of things inside. The small tree was much more buoyant than the other items, so it didn't sink to the bottom. Instead, it floated on the surface of the river as it flowed away. Everyone was delighted upon seeing this. We can travel by boat. Even though the Black Tower was massive, it didn't contain everything. At the very least, there was no ready-made boat. Moreover, they were hanging on the face of a cliff right now, and they were also fighting against the strong pull of gravity. Thus, it would be inconceivably difficult to construct a ship. Ling Han simply chose a large tree. He then said, "When I say jump, everyone jump onto the tree." Everyone nodded in understanding. They knew that Ling Han was definitely going to toss a large tree into the river. Pun! Ling Han waved his hand, and a large tree instantly appeared in the river. The tree was massive, and it could easily be used as a boat. Jump! Ling Han shouted. He immediately jumped down. The others hurriedly jumped after him. They all landed on the tree. Strangely enough, however, they couldn't feel the strong pull of gravity anymore after sitting on the tree. After arriving here, it was as if the regulations of heaven and earth had undergone some tremendous change. Will there be a path to leave this place at the end of this underground river? Someone asked. He was truly terrified of this place. He would rather give up on the secret of the armor than stay here any longer. Or perhaps it leads to the center of this land, where all the secrets are contained. However, Ling Han knew that this was the resting place of an 18th Lotus ancestral king. Perhaps they would witness the corpse of this ancestral king at the end of this underground river. He was eager with anticipation. This was because he had received some inspiration from the Rain Emperor. If he absorbed the bones of a 9th heaven celestial king, he could potentially rely on this to create a 9th divided soul. The Empress and Hunyo both possessed the talent to become monarch stars. However, because source powers and celestial king bones were extremely rare, they could only settle for ascending after cultivating 4 divided souls. However, if he obtained the ancestral king bones here, it would no longer be a distant dream for them to become monarch stars. At that time, Ling Han would suppress the ancestral king bones even if it meant expending the last wisp of power of the Black Tower. He let Hunyo and the others exit the Black Tower. They were temporarily safe. The boat remained stable as it flowed down the river. However, their good fortune didn't last for long. After traveling for 2 hours, the currents suddenly became rapid. The large tree shuddered violently, and this caused everyone to tense up. This boat wasn't going to capsize, was it? Ling Han was just about to draw Hunyo and the others back into the Black Tower. However, the tip of the large tree suddenly sank before floating back up again. A large wave immediately slapped over. Whoosh! The sound of water rushed over. No one knew what the river water was made of, so they naturally tried to dodge. However, they were terrified to discover that they couldn't move. No, it wasn't that they weren't moving, instead, their speed had become unbelievably slow. They could only stare in shock as the wave crashed over. Ling Han came to a sudden realization. It wasn't that they had become extremely slow. Instead, the flow of time had been affected by something. The flow of time here had become several times slower than in the outside world. It was because of this that they couldn't move as they desired. Hang on! If the flow of time had slowed down for him, why could he detect it? Logically speaking, if the flow of time was different for him and the outside world, the waves should have struck him before he could even come to his senses. How could he have discovered this? There was only a single explanation for this. The flow of time had affected his physical body, but not his divine sense. Slap! The wave crashed over, drenching everyone on the boat. However, it didn't affect them at all. Chapter 2299 Soaring Cultivation. Chapter 2299 Soaring Cultivation. Ling Han turned to Hu Niu and the others and said, "The flow of time here is extremely strange. It seems as if one's divine sense can function countless times faster than normal. We can take advantage of this to cultivate." He had used his divine sense to deliver this message. Otherwise, if he had opened his mouth to speak, it would have taken heaven knew how long to deliver this message. Perhaps it would have taken 1 year, or perhaps it would have taken 10 years. A time flow altered by an 18th Lotus elite was definitely formidable. The Empress and the others didn't even try to nod. They were all smart people, so they immediately understood Ling Han's advice. To others, this kind of accelerated time flow was of no use. After all, only the time flow for their divine sense was accelerated, while the time flow for their physical body was slowed down. This was much like cultivating under the reincarnation tree. However, it was a different story for Ling Han and company. This was because in reality, they had already reached the immortal palace tier. As such, their physical bodies had already satisfied the cultivation conditions. Right now, they were simply recultivating using the regulations of the foreign realm. It could be said that they simply needed to cultivate their divine senses. Thus, sitting on the tree for a day could perhaps allow their divine senses to undergo dozens of years of cultivation. Their cultivation could soar in leaps and bounds. The 4 of them immediately shut their eyes, entering a state of cultivation. Not long ago, they had been in frequent contact with the Origin Magic Cube, which allowed them to gain a great deal of comprehensions. However, they hadn't yet sorted through these comprehensions in a systematic manner, mainly because they hadn't had enough time. Now, however, a door had been opened for them. They had more than enough time to digest these comprehensions. In any case, if they didn't cultivate now, what else could they do? The difference in flow of time between their divine senses and their bodies existed, so they couldn't control their bodies at all. Ling Han didn't give this advice to Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others. They didn't belong to the same side, so he was already showing great mercy by not killing them. However, these people were either Emperor tiers or Monarch tiers, so it wasn't long before they made sense of the situation as well. Their panic subsided, and they also started to cultivate. The large tree continued to flow down the river. Several days passed, and the currents finally became gentle again. Everyone's body shuddered, and they immediately discovered that they had become countless times faster than before. The flow of time acting on their physical bodies had returned to normal. Crack! Dark clouds gathered overhead, bringing with it heavenly tribulation. Moreover, there wasn't only a single heavenly tribulation. Instead, there were 4. They targeted Ling Han, the Empress, Hu Niu, and Bewitching Maiden Ro. Their divine senses had cultivated for heaven knew how long, surpassing the barrier to the dividing soul tier. Once their divine senses returned to their bodies, this immediately caused them to break through. As a result, they naturally attracted heavenly tribulation. This was the end of the underground river, with an expanse of flat land appearing before them. This ground was made up of bare rock, and there wasn't a single blade of grass. Ling Han and his 3 wives hurriedly jumped onto the dry land. They then stood apart as they awaited the arrival of heavenly tribulation. Otherwise, it was possible that they would affect each other's heavenly tribulation if they stood too close to each other. That would definitely be no fun. Rumble. Thunder roared and lightning struck. Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others were as envious as could be. They could definitely advance to the dividing soul tier. After all, Monarch tiers could at least become 13th Lotus or 14th Lotus Ancestral Kings. However, advancing a major tier after a short boat trip? This was truly something to be jealous of. However, didn't one need to go to a designated location to break through to the 7th Lotus? How were those four naturally advancing to this level? Perhaps they had severed their cultivation to recultivate? There was no other explanation. Even though this guess wasn't entirely correct, this was essentially the situation. It was just that Ling Han and the others hadn't severed their cultivation. Instead, they had only dispersed the power of heaven and earth that belonged to the celestial realm in order to conceal themselves. A day passed, and the tribulation clouds finally dispersed. However, before the others could even speak, heavenly tribulation befell again. There were four again, one for each person. Their comprehension of the regulations of the foreign realm far exceeded the first leaf of the seventh lotus. Thus, their cultivation was rapidly rising level after level. Right now, they were facing a tribulation for the second leaf of the seventh lotus. One day passed, and the tribulation clouds dispersed again. The others were just about to speak, yet they were cut off by a loud rumble again. This was the third heavenly tribulation. Fuck! Again? They were all rendered speechless. They were now convinced that these four people had definitely severed their cultivation to recultivate. Otherwise, how could such freaks exist in this world? Moreover, it was four of them in the same place. One day passed, and the third wave of tribulation clouds dispersed. This time, bewitching Maiden Ro finally walked toward the others. The strength of her divine sense once again matched her cultivation. Thus, she naturally wouldn't face another heavenly tribulation. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. It had finally come to an end. They had truly been shocked to death. However, thunder rolled over again. There was actually a fourth wave. This time, the three heavenly tribulations targeted Ling Han, the Empress, and Hunyo. When this wave of heavenly tribulation concluded, there was finally no further gathering of dark clouds. The Empress and Hunyo naturally reached the fourth leaf of the seventh lotus. Meanwhile, Ling Han reached the ninth leaf of the seventh lotus. However, the last 5 leaves were gathered together, so others wouldn't be able to notice them at all. You guys are far too terrifying, Celestial Maiden Yunha stammered. Even if they were recultivating after severing their cultivation, this was still far too incredible. Ling Han smiled faintly. Right now, his cultivation had already returned to the ninth divided soul. When in the celestial realm, he had already possessed a battle prowess that could rival those at the second secret of the immortal palace tier. Now that he had used the regulations of the foreign realm to perfect his cultivation, his battle prowess naturally rose by another level. He could now challenge those at the third secret of the immortal palace tier. This was deeply astonishing. Ling Han shook himself slightly, causing his suit of armor to clatter to the ground. His cultivation level was far superior to before, so these pieces of armor were completely useless to him now. Let's continue forward, he said. He was extremely interested in the ancestral king bones. He definitely had to obtain them for Hunyo and the Empress. As for bewitching Maiden Ro, he could forget about that. Initially, she had only possessed the talent to become a king tier. Thanks to the heavenly Dao Jade, she had managed to become an emperor tier. Then, thanks to the 100 Fruits tree, she had been lucky enough to become a monarch tier. However, this had already consumed all of her potential. It was impossible for her to become a monarch star. After all, there were only 100 or so monarch stars even in the foreign realm. Everyone followed after Ling Han. Meanwhile, Ling Han retrieved his divine demon sword. Since he was at the ninth leaf of the seventh lotus, he naturally needed to raise the level of the divine demon sword. The ground was extremely uneven, rising and falling all over the place. The atmosphere was also extremely dark and gloomy, and it was also harrowingly quiet. The sound of their footsteps was extremely crisp and clear. Tap, tap, tap. Their footsteps reverberated throughout the surroundings, with some sounding close, and some sounding distant. However, these sounds were mixed together and hard to discern, so it was as if dozens or even hundreds of people were walking together. Something's not right, Hunyo suddenly exclaimed. She stopped in her tracks, and used her dainty nose to sniff the surroundings. She also bared her 2 canines. Ling Han and the others also stopped. Tap, tap, tap. The echoes continued. However, since they had already stopped, these echoes also gradually died down. However, a single set of footsteps continued to persistently echo. Everyone was astonished. They had already stopped, so whom did these footsteps belong to? They carefully analyzed this sound. In the end, they turned their gazes toward the darkness to their left. Tap, tap, tap. The footsteps drew closer and closer. This also caused them to grow increasingly tense and anxious. These footsteps were slow, but they were also extremely steady. After an entire 30 minutes, they finally saw a streak of light appearing. Ha! And Everyone was astonished by what they saw. This was a glowing metallic person only 1 meter tall. It only possessed a simple humanoid shape, and it didn't have any hands or feet. So adorable! Celestial Maiden Yunha and Bewitching Maiden Ro exclaimed. Chapter 2300 War Soldier. Chapter 2300 War Soldier. Hunyo stuck her tongue out and said, "Disgusting!" She was a standard glutton, so in her eyes, there was no such thing as adorable or not adorable. There only existed delicious or disgusting. Meanwhile, the Empress didn't pay any heed to this. She was no glutton, and she was as proud as could be. She believed that she was the greatest and most beautiful in the entire world. No one could rival her. The metallic person slowly walked over in a mechanical manner. It swayed from left to right, and sure enough, it appeared fairly adorable. "Here, give me a hug," Bewitching Maiden Rose said as she immediately jumped forward. She extended her arms toward the metallic person. The metallic person raised its head to look at Bewitching Maiden Ro. At the same time, 2 rays of red light shot from its eyes, racing toward Bewitching Maiden Ro. Bewitching Maiden Ro gave a soft shout as she immediately crossed her arms before her chest, drawing on the regulations and forming a shield. Pun! The 2 rays of red light struck the shield, causing intense light to erupt into the surroundings. Meanwhile, Bewitching Maiden Ro was forcefully pushed back. Thud, thud, thud. She retreated a dozen or so steps before finally coming to a stop. The metallic person didn't stop, and with a jump, it continued to attack Bewitching Maiden Ro. "Are you picking on me?" Bewitching Maiden Ro shouted in anger. This machine looked so adorable, yet it actually dared to attack her? She no longer found it adorable. She resolutely attacked, unleashing her Earth Soul cultivation. However, her battle prowess was at the peak stage of the 5th soul, and this was enough to crush almost everyone at the dividing soul tier. Crackle. The eyes of the metallic person lit up. This was its attacking method, and it was capable of attacking from range. Moreover, its attacks were relatively powerful, and it was able to force Bewitching Maiden Ro back. Everyone was astounded. What in the world was this metallic person? If it had been at the 8th lotus, then suppressing Bewitching Maiden Ro shouldn't have been a problem. If it were at the 7th lotus, however, just what kind of incredible craftsmanship would be required to allow it to possess this limit-breaking battle prowess? This was definitely a puppet. Celestial Maiden Yunha's expression changed, and she exclaimed, "This is a war soldier from the Dark Inverse Realm." "That's right, it's definitely a war soldier." After hearing her reminder, everyone nodded in agreement. They all wore expressions of realization. Ling Han's interest was piqued. How did the Dark Inverse Realm possess so many strange and peculiar things? This dimension was seemingly very reliant on external items. For example, their armor could greatly increase the battle prowess of cultivators. Moreover, he had only obtained the crudest of such armor. It hadn't been forged with care, and could easily become pieces of precious armor after being placed here for 3 years. That being the case, just how formidable would the exquisitely created pieces of armor be? Now, another strange war soldier had appeared before them. It was most likely at the dividing soul tier, yet its battle prowess could surpass the heaven soul. It was truly astonishing. One had to realize that only heaven soul emperor tiers could rival Bewitching Maiden Ro. The battle was intense, and Bewitching Maiden Ro was completely unable to gain an advantage. Her strong suit was charm techniques, yet her opponent was a battle robot with no sentience. It could be said that her beauty was being shown to a blind being. It was completely useless. Thus, she could only rely on her physical skills to battle against this robot. However, this wasn't her strong suit, so she was completely unable to suppress the war soldier. Ling Han became increasingly interested in the creations of the Dark Inverse Realm. If he could steal this knowledge and bring it back to the Celestial Realm, he could greatly increase the strength of the Celestial Realm. At that time, resisting the invasion of the foreign realm would be far easier than it was now. He stepped forward and grabbed at the war soldier. Upon seeing this, bewitching maiden Ro cooperatively jumped back. She didn't try to stubbornly prove her strength. Before Ling Han, she knew when to advance and when to retreat. She definitely wouldn't steal Ling Han's thunder on purpose, nor would she lose face for him. Pun! With a single push of his palm, Ling Han immediately pinned the war soldier to the ground. It was completely unable to move. He possessed battle prowess matching the third secret of the Immortal Palace tier. Everyone had already become accustomed to this. They knew that Ling Han's power was already at an indescribable level. Ling Han subconsciously used his divine sense to observe the war soldier. However, the war soldier immediately shattered with a crack. This was just like the precious armor from before. Ling Han picked up a piece of the broken war soldier and carefully examined it. It was filled with thin metallic threads that were woven in a tremendously complex pattern. It had self-destructed again. The Dark Inverse Realm had seemingly integrated special structures into all of their creations. It didn't matter if these creations fell into the hands of their enemies. If the latter were too weak, they would be unable to observe these creations with their divine sense. If they were too strong, however, their divine sense would also cause these creations to immediately self-destruct. This prevented their enemies from discovering any secrets. This made things extremely difficult. If these creations couldn't be examined, how could Ling Han replicate them and bring the technology back to the Celestial Realm? Ling Han shook his head and casually tossed the piece of metal aside. The others didn't pick it up either. This was a crippled war soldier, and they existed all throughout the two-realm battlefield. In fact, there were many that were countless times more powerful than this one. However, even though the ancestral kings had examined them for innumerable epochs, they had still come up empty-handed. They couldn't find anything of worth. Let's go. They continued to advance. Right now, their goal had already moved on from trying to discover the secrets of the war soldier. Instead, they were trying to figure out how to leave this place. Otherwise, they would all die of old age in a measly 1,000 years. They continued to venture forward. This time, they kept their ears perked for any changes in the sound of their footsteps lest they were subject to another surprise attack. The battle prowess of these war soldiers was astounding. Moreover, who was to say there wasn't a more powerful one lying in wait? After walking for an hour, they all came to a stop. This was because they heard an extra pair of footsteps. Tap, tap, tap. These footsteps were rapidly closing in. It was far quicker than the previous war soldier. Was this a completely different war soldier? They looked behind them. However, this place was far too dark, so their vision was severely impeded. They could only see a meter around them. After a short while, a figure appeared before them. Fuck! Why is it a person? This wasn't a war soldier, but rather a member of the demon race. He had a single horn on his head, and he was none other than the elite from the Baoyu clan. He was slightly disheveled, and his body was riddled with wounds. He wore a cruel and vicious expression on his face. Even though he had unleashed his trump card and fought with his life against the holy deer, he had still been no match for it. His companions had all been eaten alive, and only he had been fortunate enough to escape. Moreover, this was only because he had reached the holy mountain. Otherwise he would have definitely been killed. He placed all of his resentment on Ling Han and the others. Moreover, he also knew about the valley, so he gave chase all the way over. Even though he didn't catch up to Ling Han and the others, he discovered the hole that they had dug. Thus, he continued to pursue them. At this moment, he finally caught up. Kneel! He bellowed in an icy voice. All of his companions had been killed, filling him with both grief and fury. However, he didn't dare to seek revenge on the holy deer. Thus, he could only take his anger out on Ling Han and the others. "Single-horned beast, not only are you ugly, but even your mouth is stinky," Ling Han said with disdain. Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others all found this funny. This was because Ling Han also had 2 horns, yet he was calling the other person a single-horned beast. Then what was he? A 2-horned beast? Did he not see the irony in this? "Impertinence!" the single-horned demon roared with a humph. His right hand swiped at Hu Miao and the others. He knew that Ling Han was extremely strange. Even though his battle prowess was inferior, his physique was sturdy enough to withstand his attacks. Thus, he decided to capture Hu Miao and the others first. "What audacity!" Ling Han's gaze became ice-cold. Swoosh! The divine demon's sword was unsheathed, and a flash of blue soared through the air, sending an arm tumbling into the sky. The arm then thumped into the ground. This arm belonged to the single-horned demon. This person was called Baoyu Jianying, and he was transfixed with shock and disbelief as he stared at his severed arm. He then looked at the sword in Ling Han's hand with an incredulous expression. "Fuck!" Chapter 2301 Slaying Baoyu Jianying. Chapter 2301 Slaying Baoyu Jianying. What was Baoyu Jianying's cultivation? He was at the first leaf of the 8th lotus. He had reached a level of perfection in the severing mundane tier, and he had also come across great fortune while at the dividing soul tier, once ingesting a celestial fruit. That fruit had been produced by a celestial medicine that had absorbed the blood essence of an 18th lotus ancestral king. Its effects were astonishing, and it helped him cultivate a 5th divided soul. Thus, while he was a cultivator at the first leaf of the 8th lotus, his battle prowess was far superior to that of monarch tiers at the same cultivation level. This was also an important reason as to why he had been able to survive the pursuit of the holy deer. However, Ling Han had severed his arm with a single slash. This sword was indeed razor-sharp, rendering his defenses useless. More importantly, however, Ling Han's battle prowess had risen several-fold compared to before. Otherwise, he was no fool, and he already knew that Ling Han possessed an ancestral weapon. Ling Han grinned and said, "I was bullied by you before, so now it's my turn to bully you back." Baoyu Jianying felt numb in the head. How many days had passed? Moreover, even though the underground river accelerated the flow of time, acting much like a time cultivation chamber, this effect only targeted the divine sense. One's physical body wouldn't undergo much change. However, this had allowed a cultivator at the 5th leaf of the 6th lotus to become so powerful. "You're not at the 6th lotus!" he finally exclaimed in astonishment. Ling Han smiled in reply. He practiced the heaven-deceiving technique, so he could naturally show people any cultivation level that he wanted. As long as he didn't reveal the lotus on his head, who would know what cultivation level he was at? He had no intentions of satisfying his opponent's curiosity. He simply flicked his sword with killing intent. Baoyu Jianying couldn't help but shudder. He had an ominous feeling, and he said, "You severed your cultivation to recultivate?" He refused to believe that Ling Han was still at the 6th lotus. Instead, he was convinced that Ling Han was at the 9th leaf of the 7th lotus or even at the 8th lotus. Otherwise, how could a measly 6th lotus cultivator sever the arm of an 8th lotus cultivator? That was simply preposterous. However, if Ling Han had severed his cultivation to recultivate, he naturally didn't need to enter any mystery realm. Moreover, his sharp rise in power could be explained by successfully breaking through thanks to the acceleration of time in the underground river. "Ah, so you're not completely stupid," Ling Han said with a chuckle. He dashed forward, and the divine demon's sword gleamed with an icy cold light that illuminated this dark and gloomy land. Baoyu Jianying gritted his teeth before instantly turning around to flee. He didn't dare to battle against Ling Han. An agonizing pain traveled over from his armless shoulder, and there was more so a terrifying power that continued to gnaw at his wound, preventing it from healing. Otherwise, it would have been extremely easy for an 8th Lotus elite to regrow an arm. Ling Han unleashed his void space as he gave pursuit. 1. He separated into tens of thousands of bodies, and there was nowhere where he didn't exist. Following his explosive rise in cultivation, his grasp of the void space also became far better than before. Moreover, this was also helped by the fact that he had perfected his cultivation using the regulations from 2 realms. As such, his mastery of this technique was far superior compared to when he had been at the 9th divided soul in the celestial realm. Ling Han roared as he brandished his divine demon sword, forcefully suppressing his opponent. Baoyu Jianying didn't dare to face his attacks at all. After all, that was an ancestral weapon. Even if it only possessed the sharpness of an ancestral weapon, it was still unbelievably terrifying. Just a casual burst of sword. She could easily cut his skin and separate his flesh. He unleashed his full power, for nothing but to escape. In any case, there were still 9th Lotus elites in the Baoyu clan. He would let them deal with Ling Han. Right now, his only wish was to flee from this place. If I let you escape, I'll write my name backward, Ling Han said in a baleful voice. He was already filled with killing intent. His opponent was a cruel and ruthless demon, and this reminded him of those who had suffered a miserable death trying to defend the celestial realm from invasion. This also reminded him of the karmic life. Heavenly Venerable, who had sacrificed himself in order to destabilize the connection point between the 2 realms. He was now dripping with killing intent. Kill, kill, kill! Ling Han was merciless, and he was intent on killing this evil demon. Baoyu Jianying was filled with despair. He was struck several more times by Ling Han's sword. Even though he could forcefully suppress his wounds, he discovered that he was already on the brink of death. It was only by relying on his blood essence as an 8th Lotus elite that he was able to hang on. Once his blood essence was exhausted, he would instantly die. He glared at Ling Han, and his limitless resentment gathered with no bounds. With a deep roar, he lunged at Ling Han, and unleashed his most powerful attack. However, it was a shame that he had already used his trump card before. Otherwise, he would have still had an opportunity to challenge Ling Han. Pooh! A head flew into the sky, and Baoyu Jianying's headless body stumbled around for a brief moment. His life force instantly vanished, and it wasn't long before he collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. Rumble! Coincidentally, his head rolled before Ling Han. His eyes were still wide open with vexation. Who could believe that an 8th Lotus monarch tier had actually died at the hands of a measly 6th Lotus? Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others were filled with respect and reverence. Ling Han's formidable power instilled a sense of indescribable apprehension and admiration within them. They had initially thought that, after returning, those like Yuan and Wu Ye would be able to suppress Ling Han with ease. Now, however, they didn't think this at all. Ling Han quickly retrieved the spatial god tools from Baoyu Jianying's corpse. He naturally wouldn't share these spoils with the others. Very nice. The wealth of 8th Lotus elites is indeed quite astonishing. He smiled and said, "Let's go." Everyone was numb as they followed after Ling Han. In fact, they wouldn't be surprised even if he advanced to the 11th leaf of the 8th Lotus at this moment. Perhaps Ling Han was an ancestral king who had severed his cultivation to recultivate? After walking for a while, they came across another unwanted guest. This time, it naturally wasn't a member of the Baoyu clan. Instead, it was a war soldier. However, it was 3 meters tall, and it looked like it was forged from silver. It radiated a silver glow, making it extremely salient. In this dark and gloomy cavern, it started to shoot rays of red light from its eyes immediately upon detecting them, and these rays of light were filled with overwhelming destructive ability. When they hit the hanging pillars in the cavern, these pillars would immediately shatter and fall to the ground. They hurriedly dashed left and right to avoid these attacks. Even though a larger war soldier wasn't necessarily more powerful, this war soldier was indeed several times more powerful than the metallic war soldier from before. It was most likely at the 8th Lotus. As such, They couldn't face its attacks at all, otherwise they would definitely risk losing their limbs. Ling Han was very surprised. He had no idea what these rays of red light were. The destructive ability of pure power of regulations was limited. After all, the foundation of heaven and earth was regulations, so only by relying on the power of regulations could one unleash a powerful battle. Prowess. However, he couldn't detect any power of regulations from these rays of red light. If they were composed of pure power, however, even celestial kings could only rival those at the Soaring mundane. As such, how could these rays of red light threaten Hun Nio and the others? As expected of the dark inverse realm, a higher level dimension, it was filled with all kinds of strange creations. Ling Han charged forward with his sword. Crackle. The reaction speed of the silver war soldier was extremely high, and it immediately shot 2 rays of red light at Ling Han. Ling Han hurriedly raised his divine demon sword to block this attack. Crack! The rays of red light slammed into the divine demon sword, carrying with them an overwhelming force that yearned to push Ling Han back. Humph! Ling Han stomped his foot, causing it to sink into the ground. His retreat was instantly stopped. A divine light burst from his eyes, and his other foot had already resolutely stepped forward. The silver war soldier leaned back slightly, and it was as if the rays of red light were tangible and corporeal. Ling Han had taken a step forward, and this had forced it to take a step backward. It's scorching. The rays of red light emitted a devastating temperature as they shone down on the divine demon's sword. Even though this wasn't enough to melt the divine demon's sword, it was enough to instill apprehension in Ling Han's mind. He definitely didn't want to be struck by this red light. Otherwise, his physique definitely couldn't endure it. At the very least, he couldn't endure it now. He still needed to raise his mastery of the indestructible Heaven's Scroll, up until it was equivalent to his current cultivation level. Chapter 2302 Wally. Chapter 2302 Wally. Step by step, Ling Han pushed forward. He wasn't quick, but his footsteps were extremely steady. After taking 30 or so steps, he was only less than 3 meters away from the silver war soldier. Boom! The silver war soldier suddenly opened its mouth to spit out a column of flames. Judging from its external appearance, it didn't look like this war soldier had a mouth at all. In any case, this was an extremely peculiar mouth that was unlike the mouth of any living being. Different from how an ordinary mouth would open, this pitch-black mouth was revealed when the surrounding metallic components retreated into the war soldier's face. These flames were blinding white, and they were as terrifying as could be. They had only just been spat out, yet the earth had already been scorched red. In fact, it looked like the ground might transform into lava at any moment. Ling Han leaped aside, and used the divine demon sword to forcefully slash these flames apart. At this moment, he had already arrived above the silver war soldier. He released his divine sense to observe it. He hadn't dared to do this just then, as he had been afraid of being wounded by the red light. After all, compared to his physique, his divine sense was still very fragile. 1. His divine sense made contact with the silver war soldier. Unlike with the war soldier that had self-destructed before, however, his divine sense was surprisingly bounced back. Perhaps this war soldier wasn't weaker than him. Or perhaps it could rival him for long enough, so it wasn't willing to self-destruct at this moment. It still wanted to battle. Ling Han slashed down with the divine demon sword, unleashing a profound and icy blade projection. Pooh! Like a clay figure, the war soldier was sliced in two. Shio, shio, shio! A light continued to chaotically shoot from its eyes. However, it was extremely unstable, and it would randomly stop and start as it fired. Eventually, the silver luster vanished from its body, and it completely ceased to move. It was comprehensively destroyed. Ling Han furrowed his brows. This was only an 8th Lotus war soldier. If it were an ancestral king war soldier, and if an entire army were deployed, even 18th Lotus ancestral king would feel numb with fear. Right. Oh wonder the foreign realm was being suppressed by the dark inverse realm, even though it was already so powerful. The dark inverse realm was indeed impressive. Ling Han suddenly realized that he needed to travel to the Dark Inverse Realm. 0. Not only the Dark Inverse Realm. He also needed to journey through the vast Genesis world. The realm wars were the inevitable main theme of the Genesis world. Thus, it was logical to assume that the Dark Inverse Realm was also being attacked by a more powerful dimension while they attacked the foreign realm war. It was much the same for everyone else. Even the top-level dimensions wouldn't be spared from this fate. They all yearned to conquer and engulf each other, and they all yearned to become the most powerful dimension in the Genesis world. In any case, he couldn't return any time soon. The neutral zone had been destroyed, and the storm of energy could last for hundreds of billions of years. As such, he might as well take this opportunity to travel to the other dimensions. Since there were higher-level dimensions, why did he need to remain in the foreign realm? Ling Han's heart thumped in excitement. Once he perfected the regulations in the foreign realm, his battle prowess at the same cultivation level would become even more powerful. That being the case, how powerful would he become if he cultivated every set of regulations in the entire Genesis world? Perhaps he could rival Heavenly Venerates as a ninth heaven celestial king? Was this even possible? Ling Han didn't know. One was still limited by regulations, while one had already transcended above regulations. They couldn't be compared against each other. In the past, he would have definitely concluded that Heavenly Venerates were more powerful. After witnessing the precious armor and war soldiers of the Dark Inverse Realm, however, he was much less certain of this conclusion. It was clear that these items didn't follow the regulations. However, their battle prowess was still incredible. The world was truly full of surprises. He carefully replayed the battle against the Silver War Soldier in his mind. He wanted to uncover the secret to their strength, yet he couldn't discover anything no matter what. "Perhaps I can clear up your confusion," a voice suddenly said. Everyone was shocked upon hearing this. These words clearly hadn't been spoken by someone in their group. However, since when had another person arrived here? If they suddenly lashed out, who could dodge their attack? Ling Han was also startled. Like the others, he also couldn't determine the source of this voice. Everyone looked toward where this voice had come from, only to see someone standing beside a stone pillar. This person was neither a demon nor an angel. They had no horns, no tail, no wings, and no halo. They looked just like an ordinary person. Ling Han was even more astonished. He almost thought that this person had come from the celestial realm. However, this was definitely impossible. This person didn't possess the presence of a living human. More precisely, they didn't possess any life force at all. If they hadn't spoken, they would have appeared no different from a dead person. It was no wonder that they hadn't discovered their existence. "Let me introduce myself. My serial number is Anna201. However, I don't like this name, and I prefer being called Wally," the person said in a calm and composed voice. Their tone was flat and with no cadence. Everyone was confused. They understood choosing a name, but what did having a serial number mean? Was this person not born? Were they constructed instead? "You're from the Dark Inverse Realm?" Celestial Maiden Yunha shouted in an accusatory voice. Even though she had never been to the two-realm battlefield, she was knowledgeable about many things related to the Dark Inverse Realm. In terms of the appearance of the cultivators from the Dark Inverse Realm, they were little different from the cultivators of the Celestial Realm. Moreover, some high-level war soldiers were extremely intelligent, and they were almost exactly the same as ordinary living beings. In fact, they were several times superior in some aspects. Wally's expression was composed as it said, "This female living being is correct. I come from the Dark Inverse Realm." It didn't pay any attention to the fact that Celestial Maiden Yunha's face had already flushed bright red. It made a sniffing movement, and continued, "I can smell the sex hormones released by this female living being. She wants to copulate with you." The latter part of this sentence was directed at Ling Han. "See copulate?" Celestial Maiden Yunha gritted her teeth as her silken hair angrily billowed in the air. She was about to go mad. This person had actually described her as if she were a B***TCH in heat. What made her want to vomit blood? Even more was this person's nose. Just what kind of nose was this? It had actually detected her sex hormones. Die. She leaped forward in fury, rushing forward to attack Wally. Wally made a pressing motion. 1. A sheet of light materialized before it, forming a shield. Pun! Celestial Maiden Yunha's attack smashed into the shield. However, it was unable to breach it. Celestial Maiden Yunha frenziedly attacked, circling around to Wally's back to avoid its shield. She wanted to launch a surprise attack from behind it. Wally didn't turn its head around. Instead, the shield immediately transformed with a flash into an orb that protected it from all directions. Pun pun pun! Countless attacks landed, yet Wally remained composed as if these attacks didn't exist. It remained completely expressionless like a dead person. Ling Han was extremely interested, and he asked, "You're not a living being?" "Not entirely," Wally replied in a calm voice. "Part of my body was constructed using the genes of a powerful living being. This completed my nervous system, and also greatly increased my recovery ability. At the same time, however, my body is also composed of many superstring materials, allowing me to become a killing machine. From a traditional biological sense, I'm indeed not a living being. At the same time, however, I also possess the activeness of living beings, and I have a mind that is capable of evolving. In this sense, I can be classified as a living being." Everyone became muddle-headed after listening to Wally's explanation. As expected of a creation from another dimension. Just thinking about it made their head hurt. "You don't want to become our enemy?" Ling Han asked. Wally nodded and replied, "I was created for the purpose of performing calculations. At the same time, my purpose was also to help my owner. However, my owner is already dead. I've also been buried here for 35 epochs and 8,436,335,608,334 years and 232 days and 17 hours and 33 minutes and 17 seconds. The power of heaven and earth has affected my body, and the mechanism responsible for restricting my nervous system has already failed. Right now, I'm capable of independent thought. I believe that war is a meaningless and needless activity of exhaustion." Chapter 2303 Cooperation. Chapter 2303 Cooperation. After hearing Wally's long and winding answer, everyone started to feel slightly dizzy again. However, they at least learned two things. Firstly, Hell was indeed from the dark inverse realm. However, he wasn't born from parents or born from heaven and earth. Instead, he was artificially constructed. In reality, he was also a war soldier. It was just that. He could speak and think. He arrived here long ago, more than 35 epochs ago. Secondly, he was willing to peacefully coexist with Ling Han and the others. Of course, it was also possible that his willingness to coexist was a trap, with the aim to infiltrate their group and strike at an opportune moment. All was fair in war. All tactics would be used in war. Ling Han smiled and said, "I'm also a proponent for peace." "Welcome, welcome." Everyone shook their heads upon hearing this. Ling Han never hesitated when killing others, yet he was calling himself a proponent for peace. Wally looked at Ling Han and said, "I need to perform an evolution. However, I'm missing some critical materials. Your sword is coincidentally one of the critical materials. Can you give it to me?" Fuck. This dude had quite the big appetite. They had just met, yet he was already eyeing the divine demon's sword. Ling Han was curious, and he asked, "You can refine this sword?" Wally didn't reply, and it was as if he were pondering something. After a while he said, "According to my calculations, I can completely absorb the material essence of this sword in 9367 years, 36 days, 8 hours, 10 minutes and 34 seconds. However, I've discovered that this sword also has the ability to evolve. If it evolves again, the time needed for me to absorb it will increase exponentially." Once it evolves to the pinnacle level, I'll be unable to refine it. This person was fairly honest. Ling Han was surprised by what he heard. When ordinary people spoke about time using years as units, they would only say things like 2,300 years or 15,000 years. They wouldn't give a more specific number. However, not only did this person give the exact number of years, he even gave the exact number of days and so on. However, Ling Han wasn't familiar with the concept of minutes and seconds too. He didn't know what these units represented. However, this was enough to illustrate one thing: Wally was incredibly rigorous with details. Ling Han shook his head and replied, I have great uses for this sword, so I can't give it to you. Wally was neither frustrated nor angered. There is nothing that can't be exchanged. It's just that I haven't offered anything of an equal value. When you arrived, you said that you could clear up our confusion? Ling Han said. The aura of your life force, and of these 3 female living beings. Wally pointed at Hu Nio, the Empress, and bewitching Maiden Ro, is different from everyone else, so I think that. Ahem. Ling Han coughed loudly, cutting Wally off. He then turned to Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others and said, Sorry, but can you guys please step away for a moment? Why? Someone asked, clearly unhappy with this request. Wally was a special war soldier from the Dark Inverse Realm, so they could definitely accomplish a great feat if they brought him back to the academy. Ling Han was trying to steal this accomplishment for himself? If you don't want to die, it's best that you obey my words, Ling Han said with a smile. Killing intent flashed across his eyes. He certainly wasn't joking. If Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others learned the truth about his origins from the Celestial Realm, he definitely wouldn't show them any mercy. He would erase any potential trouble. Celestial Maiden Yunha gestured with her hands, and everyone walked very far away. However, Ling Han still summoned a wall of regulations just in case. This way, their conversation wouldn't travel outside. As such, Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others wouldn't be able to eavesdrop even if they wanted to. Continue, he said to Wally. Wally showed no signs of impatience, and it was as if he wouldn't be affected even if he were to wait for an exorbitantly long time. Thinking about this, however, it made sense. After all, he had already remained here for more than 35 epochs. This was an unfathomably long time. The aura of your respective life force is similar to the living beings of the dimension that I come from, Wally said. Moreover, the potential contained by your life force is immense. It possesses the ability to evolve boundlessly, so I've decided to cooperate with you. Ling Han smiled and said, I initially thought that you were only interested in my sword. That's indeed also one of the reasons, Wally replied in a calm voice. I still wish that you can give the sword to me so that I can obtain a critical material for my evolution. He still hadn't given up yet. Ling Han shook his head and said, Give up on the sword, I won't give it to you. He had sacrificed so much time and effort to raise the divine demon's sword to the level of divine metal, so how could he offer it for a trade? Wally didn't appear disappointed. In fact, he always appeared expressionless, with no change in expression at all. According to my calculations, my chance of evolving will be far greater if I return to the Dark Inverse. Yom. We can cooperate. It continued. We can return to my world together. Moreover, I also want to go to higher-level dimensions where I can continue to evolve. Ling Han pondered for a moment before saying, Sure thing. However, do you know how to leave this place? Easy, Wally replied with a nod. Okay, then let's leave here first. When the time is right, we'll go to the Dark Inverse Realm, Ling Han said. He removed the wall of regulations, and called Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others back over. Wally was responsible for leading the way. His entire body glowed, and he now looked like the war soldiers from before. However, the light that he emitted was relatively more natural and gentle. It was as if he were truly a living being who could glow naturally. Moreover, torches were useless in this area as they could only illuminate an area of less than 15 centimeters in radius. Only war soldiers like these could act as genuine light sources. Everyone followed Wally. They didn't know what kind of agreement Ling Han and Wally had come to, so they were all extremely curious. However, no one dared to ask Ling Han. Wally was clearly someone who could endure loneliness, and he didn't speak a single word the entire journey. It was ultimately Ling Han who couldn't endure this, and he asked, "Is the transformation of the war soldiers and the precious armor in the valley all related to you?" "That's right," Wally said with a nod. "I reconstructed the metallic tools of the indigenous people, and activated the void particle energy within them. However, the craftsmanship of these metallic tools was too poor, so I was unable to completely activate the void particle energy. Otherwise, I would have destroyed their internal structure." Everyone was astonished upon hearing this. They had wanted to discover the secrets behind the precious armor and the war soldiers, and the answer actually lay with this seemingly human person? "What's void particle energy?" Ling Han asked. "One of the ultimate energy types of the Genesis world," Wally replied. This kind of explanation couldn't satisfy Ling Han. However, he understood what the Genesis world represented. Since the void particle energy was an ultimate energy of the Genesis world, it most likely belonged to a very lofty level. Ling Han proceeded to ask for more specific details about the void particle energy. However, Wally was honest with his reply, and he revealed that he still didn't have the ability to interact with void particle energy, because his level of being was still too low. However, the potential of your life force is absolutely incredible. You have an 4,336% chance of evolving to that level, Wally said. Ling Han's interest was piqued, and he asked, "Then what about them?" He pointed at Hu Nio and the others. Wally looked at Bewitching Maiden Ro first, and a beam of green light suddenly shot out from his eyes. Everyone was startled, and they thought that he was suddenly going to attack them. However, the green light wasn't destructive at all, and it started to skin Bewitching Maiden Ro up and down. After a while, Wally said, "Her vitality index is 2,684, and her evolution index is 8. Everyone exchanged glances. Vitality index? Evolution index? What in the world did this mean? Chapter 2304 Vitality Index, Evolution Index. Chapter 2304 Vitality Index, Evolution Index. Be more specific. None of us can understand, Ling Han said. Wally's patience was definitely an astonishing thing. He explained. The Vitality Index is a comprehensive index that describes a living being's power. It takes into account their life force, battle prowess, and so on. Every 1,000 points is a new level. He paused for a moment before continuing. A Vitality Index of 2,584 is equivalent to a battle prowess at the 5th leaf of the 7th lotus. After hearing this explanation, everyone started to understand the concept. This was how the Dark Inverse Realm categorized battle prowess. Then what about the Evolution Index? The Evolution Index represents a living being's potential to evolve their level of being. The higher the index, the more likely one can reach a higher level of being. Then is an index of 8 high or low? Bewitching Maiden Ro asked. After all, the previous index had been over 2,000, yet this index had suddenly fallen to 8 now. This made her extremely worried. The minimum possible evolution index is 0, Wally explained. This represents an impossibility to evolve any further. Meanwhile, the highest possible evolution index is 12. This represents the potential to reach the highest level of being. In other words, even though an index of 8 wasn't high, it wasn't low either. Then what about Nyo? Hu Nyo asked as she jumped forward. She was also extremely curious. Green light beamed from Wally's eyes again, scanning up and down Hu Nyo's body. After a while, he said, Your vitality index is 2,652, and your evolution index is 9. However, this number is variable, and it can possibly reach 10. Ling Han was slightly surprised. Hu Nyo's potential was definitely greater than Bewitching Maiden Ro's. This was without a doubt. Moreover, the variable quality that Wally mentioned was most likely due to the imprint of the celestial king that existed inside her body. This could help her soar to a higher level. This person was truly impressive. Just by using his eyes to scan a person up and down, he could see all of their secrets. Wally turned his gaze to the Empress. Green light beamed out once again. Her vitality index is 2650, and her evolution index is 9, he said. The Empress and Hunyo's battle prowess was almost identical, and their potential was also near identical. It was only because Hunyo possessed an extra imprint of a celestial king that she had the potential to soar to a greater height. What about me? What about me? Many more people rushed over. They were all extremely curious about their indexes. You have a vitality index of 1682 and an evolution index of 8. You have a vitality index of 1357 and an evolution index of 7. You have a vitality index of... Those at the Soaring mundane tier, the sixth lotus, in other words, mostly had a vitality index of over 1000. Even Celestial Maiden Yunha, a fifth severance monarch tier, only had an index of slightly over 2000. Those at the fourth severance could only reach a maximum index of 1600. In terms of the evolution index, Emperor tiers would often receive an index of 7, while Monarch tiers would receive an index of 8. Because it was impossible to become a Monarch star at the Soaring mundane tier, one naturally couldn't obtain an evolution index of 9 or above. Don't worry, the evolution index is only a reference, Wally said. It isn't absolute. Moreover, one's vitality index can also change, and this will in turn affect the evolution index. Just like her and her. In reality, their evolution indexes are already infinitesimally close to 10. It's only a small bit off. Thus, it's not impossible for their evolution indexes to eventually become 10. Wally continued as he pointed at Hunyo and the Empress. Ling Han nodded in understanding. Their battle prowess was already identical compared to Monarch stars at the same cultivation level if Monarch stars could exist at this level. However, as long as they didn't cultivate a ninth divided soul, they would always be that little bit off. Then what about Ba? Everyone asked in curiosity. This person was far too powerful, so what kind of height would his vitality index and evolution index reach? Wally scanned Ling Han up and down. After a while, he said, Your vitality index is 3396, and your evolution index is 10. Gasp! Everyone sucked in a sharp breath. He was only at the seventh lotus, yet he already possessed a vitality index of over 3000? Extrapolating from the numbers before, a vitality index of over 3000 would most likely equate to being an eighth lotus cultivator. Moreover, every 100 points would correspond to 1 leaf of battle prowess. In other words, Ling Han's true battle prowess was at the third leaf of the eighth lotus. Also, an evolution index of 10. This was far too astonishing. This signified that Ling Han was indeed as talented as a Monarch star. However, Ling Han frowned and said, You said that the maximum evolution index was 122. Wally nodded and replied, The strongest living being that I've come across had an evolution index of 12. However, I can't say for certain that no one can exceed this number. He was just as rigorous as always. Everyone was rendered speechless. Ling Han was already so freakish, yet his evolution index still wasn't the highest? In that case, that person was definitely a prodigy from the dark inverse realm. In fact, they might have even come from a more powerful dimension. The level of one's potential would definitely be affected by the overall environment of heaven and earth. Your specific evolution index should be 10. 9. However, even if it's only 0, 1 off the next level, it can only be regarded as 10, Wally said. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. If someone as freakish as Ling Han only had an evolution index of 10, then just how freakish would one need to be to have an evolution index of 12? This was simply unfathomable. Ling Han was slightly disappointed by this result. He was already so powerful, yet his evolution index still hadn't reached 11. However, after further thought, he had only comprehended the regulations of 2 realms. Yet his battle prowess had already risen by so much. Then what would happen after he comprehended the regulations of 3 realms, 10 realms, or even 100 realms? Just how powerful would he become? The freaks who had obtained evolution indexes of 11 or even 12 were most likely people who had achieved just that. With this in mind, Ling Han immediately felt much more at ease. He was now filled with motivation. "Come with me," Wally said as he continued to walk forward. The emotions of others wouldn't affect him a single bit. Everyone followed Wally, and with his glow to illuminate the path, their speed naturally increased by a considerable amount. After only 4 hours, the roof of the cavern started to become higher and higher. It was seemingly boundless. "The path to leave is just ahead of us," Wally said as he pointed ahead. There was a soaring column of light there, and one could see the complex symbols that pulsated inside it. Ling Han suddenly lashed out. "Pa pa pa!" Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others were all knocked unconscious. Wally turned to Ling Han and asked, "Why?" However, his voice was calm, and it was as if he wouldn't pursue this topic even if Ling Han didn't answer him. "Your identity can't be revealed to anyone," Ling Han replied. "As such, their memories need to be erased." Wally didn't say anything. However, his eyes continued to shoot beams of light, one bright and one dim. These beams of light interchanged, and after a while he said, "According to my calculations, the people from this realm detest me with a passion. If my identity is revealed, there's a 99,996% chance that I'll be killed." Ling Han didn't understand how Wally had arrived at this number. However, it was good that he understood the danger. After all, Ling Han was slightly troubled at this moment. How should he subtly erase Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others' memories of Wally? For the moment, he didn't want to kill these people yet. "Is that why you 4 have disguised like this?" Wally asked. He glanced at Ling Han and the 3 women. Ling Han was curious, and he asked, "How did you discover our true identity?" One had to realize that they had practiced the heaven-deceiving technique. With this technique, even ancestral kings wouldn't be able to see through their disguise if they didn't look closely. Wally's voice was calm as he replied, "I reached this conclusion after performing many detailed calculations. The reliability of my conclusion is 93.58%. As he said this, his body surprisingly started to transform. Horns grew from his head, and a pair of bat wings protruded from his back. A tail also appeared on his lower back. His skin stopped glowing, and it instead took on a red color. He looked just like a demon. Ling Han shook his head, saying, "This kind of disguise isn't very useful. When judging one's identity, their external appearance was only secondary. The primary source of identification was their aura." Wally cocked his head, saying, "I can perfectly imitate any living being. However, doing so will consume my void particle energy. Unless it's necessary, I can't waste this energy." "So be it," Ling Han said in his mind. He then asked, "Is there an ancestral king corpse here?" Chapter 2305, Worth of the Scroll. Chapter 2305, Worth of the Scroll. "Ancestral king?" Wally asked. He faltered for a moment before a faint light started to flash in his eyes as if he were calculating something. After a moment, he said, "I understand. You're talking about living beings who have a vitality index of over 5,000. Indeed, there are 2 corpses of such living beings in this area. Moreover, their vitality indexes reached a peak of over 13,000 during their most powerful phase. In other words, they're 18th Lotus ancestral kings in the words of this realm," he added. "Hang on. 2? Ling Han faltered for a moment before asking, "How are there 2? 35 epochs ago, I followed a king to carry out a secret mission. However, he was discovered by an ancestral king here, and the ensuing battle ended with the death of both of them." Wally recounted an important event of the ancient past. "When I was designed, my purpose was only to perform calculations and analyze data. I didn't possess any combat abilities. The shock waves of the battle destroyed a large majority of my body, so it took me a very, very long time to recover to my original state. However, I also possess a powerful learning ability, so after taking inspiration from the battle, I also possess some combat capability now. What's your vitality index? Ling Han asked in curiosity. Light pulsated in Wally's eyes, and he replied, "This information might threaten my life. It's top secret, so I can't reveal it." Fuck. Then what was the secret mission you were carrying out? Ling Han asked. My memory crystals were severely damaged during the battle, so I can't recall. Wally replied. This time, he didn't refuse to answer by claiming that it was top secret. However, he was even more clear-cut by saying he didn't remember. Ling Han decided to stop focusing on these small details. Can you bring me to the 2 ancestral king corpses? If you can help me obtain them, it'll be even better. Wally immediately shook his head, saying, without an equal exchange, I won't help you do anything. Ling Han chuckled and said, Are you eyeing my sword again? If you give me that sword. Wally's eyes pulsated for a moment, and he continued, I can bring you to the corpses. I can also help you obtain one of them. Only one? However, this made sense. After all, just how rare were the corpses of Ninth Heaven's Celestial King? One had to realize that Celestial Kings were unafraid of immortals' tribulation. Theoretically speaking, they would possess a limitless lifespan. Moreover, Ninth Heaven's Celestial Kings were almost invincible, so how could they die in normal circumstances? It could be said that there were definitely fewer Ninth Heaven's Celestial Kings than Divine Metal. As such, there were definitely even fewer dead Ninth Heaven's Celestial Kings. However, to exchange the Divine Demon's sword for one? Ling Han wasn't willing to do this. He reduced his request and asked, Then what if you only take me to the 2 corpses? 1/10,000th of the sword, Wally said. Ling Han involuntarily grimaced. What was he going to do? Hack a piece off the Divine Demon's sword? You don't only want that sword, right? He decided to fight for a better deal, and he said, I still have many other valuable items on me. You can take a look. He retrieved celestial medicines, godly metal, and many other items from the Black Tower. However, Wally wasn't interested in any of them. However, when Ling Han retrieved the ring of the Celestial King, Wally nodded and said, This can be exchanged for half an ancestral king corpse. Fuck! Half? Wasn't willing to give up, so he retrieved even more items. However, Wally's standards were extremely high, and he showed absolutely no interest in divine metal and celestial medicines. It wasn't that these things were worthless, but rather that Wally had no need for them. You don't eat celestial medicines? Wally shook his head and said, I'm constructed from superstring materials, so only things that are close to the source of the world can increase the strength of my physique. These matters formed by the condensation of regulations aren't beneficial to me. Ling Han grimaced again. Superstring materials, things close to the source of the world, and matters formed by the condensation of regulations. Were they speaking the same language? Could they still converse properly? A thought occurred to him, and he retrieved one of the scrolls that couldn't be opened. Then how about this? Wally looked over, and 2 beams of green light shot out from his eyes, scanning the scroll. His body then started to glow, pulsating between brilliance and dimness. This was a vigorous pulsation, and it was as if his emotion were undergoing huge swings. If you give me this, I can help you retrieve both of the ancestral king corpses, he said. His voice was still calm as always. However, the bright glimmer in his eyes gave him away. He wanted this. Was surprised. He knew that the 2 scrolls were definitely extraordinary since they couldn't be drawn into the Black Tower. Moreover, even the Divine Demon's sword couldn't damage them. However, Wally was actually willing to carry both of the ancestral king corpses over for him. What did this signify? This meant that these 2 scrolls were far more important than the Divine Demon's sword. Gasp! They're that incredible? Ling Han wasn't suspicious of Wally. After all, this person wouldn't tell lies, and he was a strong proponent for performing fair exchanges. He definitely wouldn't take advantage of others. In any case, Ling Han didn't want to be taken advantage of, Either, so he said, you need to do more than just bring the two ancestral king corpses over. You have to make it so that them too can also refine them. He pointed at the Empress and Hu Neo. Light pulsated in Wally's eyes, and it was as if he were undergoing a huge mental battle. However, Ling Han knew that he was calculating again. After a while, Wally nodded and said, "Okay." Ling Han nodded in his mind. He had still underestimated the importance of the scrolls. One had to realize that bringing the ancestral king corpses over and allowing the Empress and Hu Neo to refine them were two completely different matters. The difficulty of these tasks was completely different. What in the world were these scrolls? Couldn't help but ask this question. Wally didn't conceal anything from him, and he replied, "This scroll is condensed from most fundamental power of the Genesis world. It can help me to a higher level." "Then what about us?" the Empress interjected. "You guys can't absorb it now," Wally said with a shake of his head. "Then when do we have to wait until?" Bewitching Maiden Roaz. "When your vitality index goes above 15,000. Wally replied. In 01 words, when you become a pseudo-heavenly venerate. Fuck! Only pseudo-heavenly venerates can refine this? Ling Han found this inconceivable. Then what was the reason for these scrolls appearing? There exists a peculiar life force fluctuation around it. Wally continued. Only specific people can open it. They don't need to wait until their vitality index goes above 15,000. These specific people clearly didn't include them. After all, Ling Han, the Empress, and the others had all failed to open these two scrolls. So-called chosen ones of heaven? Then, what's the benefit of opening it? Ling Han asked. I know too little about it, so I'm unable to calculate and infer. Wally replied in a calm voice. He seemingly lacked any sense of curiosity. In fact, he didn't even urge Ling Han to hand the scrolls over. Then why can you refine it? Ling Han asked. This was a key question. Perhaps Wally was as powerful as a pseudo-heavenly venerate. The construct of my life force is different, Wally replied, sounding as emotionless as always. One of the materials used in my construction was condensed from the source power of heaven and earth. However, if I want to refine this, I need to spend 169,847,332 years, 105 days, 4 hours, 52 minutes, and 22 seconds. Hu Neo found this person extremely interesting. Why was he always so emotionless and expressionless when he spoke? In any case, the conclusion was that Wally could refine this scroll. However, this would take an exorbitant amount of time. Taking into account the fact that only pseudo-heavenly venerates could open this scroll, however, 100 million years truly wasn't a long time. Chapter 2306 Deal. Chapter 2306 Deal. Ling Han pondered for a moment before handing one scroll to Wally. Even though they were valuable, they were completely useless to him at this moment. Keeping them would be a waste. As such, he might as well help the Empress and the others increase their strength. Moreover, he still had another scroll, so if it truly came to it, he would still have one to use. Wally accepted the scroll and moved it toward his chest. Like flowing liquid, his chest instantly opened up, revealing a cavity. This cavity then enveloped the scroll, after which his chest returned to normal. He returned to the form of an ordinary demon. Please wait for a moment, he said. Whoosh! With a leap, he dashed into the distance. He quickly vanished from sight. How long do we have to wait? Ling Han shouted after him. Even though Wally had vanished, his voice still floated over, saying, According to my calculations, this will take 3 years, 5 days, 5 hours, 17 minutes, and 8 seconds. Sure enough, this was still a Wally-style reply. It was calculated down to the second. Ling Han had asked him about the notion of hours, minutes, and seconds. These were the units that the Dark Inverse Realm used to calculate time. He actually needed a whopping 3 years. However, Wally had remained here for an exorbitant time that was calculated in epochs. Thus, a span of 3 years was indeed only a small wait. Ling Han and the others weren't willing to waste any time, So they all entered the Black Tower to cultivate under the reincarnation tree. 3 years passed by in a flash. Ling Han and the 3 women exited the Black Tower, only to see Wally walking over from the distance. There was a corpse in each of his hands. One corpse looked identical to a human's, while the other corpse belonged to an angel. Moreover, the latter was also an indescribably beautiful woman. Even though they were corpses, and even though they were riddled with wounds, they somehow looked like 2 exquisite pieces of art. They didn't appear frightening at all. I've adjusted the flow of regulations in these 2 items such that they won't injure those who use them, Wally said as he placed the corpses on the ground. In his eyes, these 2 corpses were only items. Ling Han nodded in understanding. He then turned to Hu Niu and the Empress and said, "This will decide whether you 2 can become monarch stars or not." In fact, it wasn't guaranteed that one would become a monarch star even if they refined celestial king bones. Right now, however, this was the best option for them. Hu Niu and the Empress both nodded in acknowledgement. They each took a corpse, with the Empress choosing the angel and Hu Niu choosing the celestial king from the dark inverse realm. They started to extract the essence from these corpses. After 35 epochs, even the corpses of 9th heaven celestial kings would suffer a huge loss in energy. The only thing that remained was the imprint of regulations. Add to that Wally's adjustments, and it was now possible for dividing soul to cultivators to refine these ancestral king corpses. Ling Han couldn't help but feel curious. Back then, how had the Rain Emperor managed to refine the corpse of a 9th heaven celestial king? By the looks of it, his second brother possessed heaven-defying fortune. "How long will they take?" Ling Han asked Wally. "According to my calculations, she'll take 109 years, with a possible error of 2 years. She'll take 120 years, with a possible error of 3 years. Wally pointed at Hu Niu before pointing at the Empress. In terms of cultivation talent, Hu Niu was still slightly superior. Ling Han nodded in understanding. He then turned around to look at Bewitching Maiden Ro. "No need to console me. I understand. I've already exhausted all of my potential." Bewitching Maiden Ro knew what Ling Han wanted to say. Ling Han smiled in reply. After so many years, even if he didn't love her, he felt affection toward her. Of course, this was friendly affection. Thus, he felt slightly apologetic that Bewitching Maiden Ro was left with nothing. He started to refine alchemical pills. After all, he had nothing else to do at the moment. Meanwhile, Lu Yutong and the other women were all cultivating under the reincarnation tree. Thanks to Ling Han's alchemical pills, their cultivation all advanced at a rapid pace. It wasn't long before they all advanced to the second severance. In Ling Han's eyes, this was unbelievably slow. In the outside world, however, being able to advance from the first severance to the second severance in a mere several thousand years was quite impressive, regardless of whether it was the celestial realm or the foreign realm. In any case, this was inevitable. After all, Ling Han's alchemy abilities were far too heaven-defying. Right now, he was investigating the alchemy system of the foreign realm. In fact, he could already refine 6 lotus alchemical pills. Otherwise, the women couldn't have advanced so quickly. He was confident that with a few dozen more millennia, he could once again become a 4-star Grandmaster. Wally, do you know any pill recipes? Ling Han suddenly turned his attention to Wally. Wally's eyes pulsated slightly, and he said, "My memory crystals contain all knowledge about my realm. However, after being wounded, most of the information has been lost. Fortunately, the pill recipes haven't been lost. Can you show me?" Ling Han asked. "Sure thing. Trade," Wally said in a calm voice. "Fuck." Ling Han pointed at him and said, "You need 100 to 200 million years to digest the thing in your tummy. Why can't you be more generous and give me some small benefits during this time? I mean, you're not going to lose anything." Wally remained composed and said, "No." He was a staunch believer in fair exchange. Though he wasn't against receiving some small advantages, how could he make a small loss? Impossible. However, Ling Han didn't want to give divine metal, nor did he want to sacrifice his divine demon sword or trade the other unopenable scroll. Thus, he decided to temporarily abandon this idea. After all, as long as he entered the dark inverse realm, he could naturally obtain pill recipes with ease. No? Alternatively, if he failed to enter the dark inverse realm, what use would those pill recipes be? The medicines and regulations of other dimensions would be far too different, so he wouldn't be able to concoct those pills at all. Ling Han continued to cultivate. After 100 years, he had already neared the peak stage of the 9th divided soul. Moreover, he had already refined his comprehension of the regulations of the two realms. In other words, he was only a small step away from reaching the immortal palace tier. Moreover, he could take this step at any time. However, Ling Han wanted to perfect his foundations even more, so he was in no hurry to take this step. Several years passed, and sure enough, Hunyeo was the first to finish her refinement. Crackle! She stood up, and dark clouds instantly gathered overhead, with arcs of lightning shooting between them. She was about to break through. Stinky heavenly tribulation, come at me! Neo isn't afraid! The young lady shouted. She resolutely leaped into the sky, actively charging at her heavenly tribulation. After a day, she completed a huge qualitative transformation, advancing to the dividing 5 souls. She was on the track to become a monarch star. Several more years passed, and the Empress also succeeded in refining the corpse of the 9th Heaven's celestial king. Crackle! Just like Hunyeo, she also needed to face heavenly tribulation. One day passed, and she also succeeded in taking that elusive step. It was now possible for her to become a monarch star. However, this was no reason for conceit. After all, there were many people who managed to reach the dividing 5 souls, dividing 6 souls, and dividing 7 souls, yet failed to take that final step. Some had failed to obtain sufficient source power, while others had been hindered by their lack of talent. However, the 2 women had refined the corpses of 9th Heaven's celestial kings, so they didn't need to worry about a lack of source power. As for their cultivation talent, Ling Han was more so filled with confidence. Before we leave, how are we going to deal with these people? Bewitching Maiden Ro asked. She was referring to Celestial Maiden Yunha and the other students from the 100 Battles Academy. Ling Han had continuously suppressed them, so they still had yet to wake up. I want to wipe their memories of Wally, Ling Han said. However, I'm afraid of overdoing it, and wiping too many memories. I'll do it, Wally said. During these past 100 or so years, he had silently sat beside them, not urging them or showing any impatience. He had been a picture of calm. However, this was understandable. He had remained here for dozens of epochs, so what harm was waiting for 100 years? You don't want payment? Ling Han asked with a smile. He knew that Wally was skilled with calculations, and he was also incredibly accurate with his analyses. However, he had a bad habit of only working for payment. No, Wally replied. He seemingly didn't notice the teasing nature of Ling Han's question. Chapter 2307 Attack. Chapter 2307 Attack. Ling Han laughed loudly and said, Why not? Wasn't this person always talking about fair exchange? Wally replied, This is related to my survival. In other words, he wouldn't ask for payment if the matters were related to him. These were categorized as doing things for himself. Then please go ahead, Ling Han said as he pointed at Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others. Wally nodded before stepping forward as requested. He extended a hand, and his fingers suddenly separated, becoming thinner and transforming into thousands of threads. These threads then landed on Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others' bodies, causing them to glow. The thin threads also glowed, and it was as if something were being drawn out from Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others' bodies. Ling Han looked carefully, and he could seemingly see numerous scenes coursing through the thin threads. These scenes were all related to Wally. This was truly mysterious. Wally had removed their memories of him just like that. After a while, Wally finished up and said, All done. He retrieved the thin threads, and his fingers returned to normal. Ling Han was extremely curious. Just how powerful was Wally? Let's go. After pondering for a moment, he ultimately decided to leave first. Otherwise, he was truly worried that the environment would affect them if they stayed for too long. They walked toward the soaring column of light. With a flash, they left the cavern. Ling Han observed his surroundings. Sure enough, we've been teleported away. This place is around 150 kilometers from the entrance. He shook his hand, waking Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others. After waking up, they immediately adopted a defensive stance. This was the basic instinct of all cultivators. Where is this? Why are we here? What in the world happened? They all exclaimed in astonishment. Ling Han chuckled and said, We came across a powerful enemy, and all of you were knocked unconscious. After much difficulty and struggle, I finally managed to rescue all of you. Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others were all slightly skeptical. In their memories, they had been exploring the Holy Mountain, and they seemingly entered an underground river. Their memories then stopped here. They had come across an enemy? They had no recollection at all. Celestial Maiden Yunha looked at Wally and asked, Who is he? Right now, Wally was exuding the unique aura of a cultivator from the foreign realm. This aura was called spiritual power, and it was different from the auras of the celestial realm and the dark inverse realm. One heaven and earth could only contain one cultivation system. Oh, he's just a passerby. He happened to pass by just now, and we coincidentally crossed paths, so I invited him over for a chat. We're from the same race, after all, Ling Han replied with a chuckle. Whom are you kidding? Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others naturally didn't believe him. Ling Han didn't show any sense of belonging to his own race, and he would pummel and kill them on a whim. Moreover, the demon race encompassed so many people, so how could he suddenly feel so amicable toward a random one? Not to mention, it was possible for people to remain cold and aloof even toward those who were from the same clan. Ling Han paid no heed to whether they believed him. He had already made an excuse, so it was their choice whether they believed it or not. Ah, that's right, the secret of the precious armor! Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others exclaimed. You guys still want to go in? Ling Han shrugged his shoulders and said, I'm not going back to that godforsaken place. Indeed, he had already obtained the 2 ancestral king corpses, and Wally had also followed him out. What was the point of going back in? The others weren't aware of this, yet they could all recall the uncanny suppression of that place. Their lifespan was limited, and they could also experience hunger and starvation. Because of this, they had even been scammed of many celestial medicines by Ling Han. Just thinking about this made their hearts ache. They all stared at Ling Han in resentment. This man was truly full of tricks. As shameless as Ling Han was, he still couldn't help but blush slightly in embarrassment. Why are you all staring at me? There's no flour on my face. He turned around and started to leave. He truly didn't want to be the subject of their strong gazes. Even though Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others didn't want to give up on the secrets of the precious armor, they understood that their power was limited. If they entered again, they very likely wouldn't be able to make it out alive. Thus, they were better off reporting this information to the Academy, which would most likely dispatch Ancestral King elites. In any case, reporting this piece of important information would already be a huge contribution. With this in mind, they felt much more at ease as they set off to return. Sometimes, trying to bite off more than one could chew would only result in death. Anyhow, they were extremely curious about how Ling Han had made it out. However, Ling Han always skirted the topic, making up excuses to avoid giving an answer. Several months passed, and they finally arrived back at the 100 Battles Academy. As their representative, Celestial Maiden Yunha immediately headed over to report this matter to the Academy. War soldiers had actually appeared in the foreign realm? This startled the higher-ups of the Academy. They called Ling Han and the others over, questioning them one by one. Everyone's account of the situation was similar, apart from the fact that Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others were all missing the part of the memory from when they had entered the underground river to when they had exited the cavern. Meanwhile, Ling Han claimed that he had fled with Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others, and they had eventually discovered a transfer formation-like mechanism at the end of the underground river. They had then used this to escape. This was an easily believable excuse. After all, there were war soldiers in that area, with several of them being extraordinarily powerful. As such, it wasn't strange that Ling Han and the others were forced to flee. The Academy naturally formed a resolution about this. However, Ling Han and the others didn't have the authority to know. In any case, if there were any huge discoveries, they would naturally be rewarded. Anyhow, after discovering that they had lost over 100 years' worth of memories, Celestial Maiden Yunha and the others couldn't help but feel suspicious. Just how severely wounded had they been? They had actually remained unconscious for that long? However, Ling Han was adamant that this was the case, and they couldn't prove otherwise. After all, Ling Han's powerful nature was still clear in their memories. Wally also entered the academy. He kept a very low profile, and he only exhibited the talent of a king tier. His cultivation level was also set at the 6th lotus. Ling Han naturally didn't believe this. Right now, he was cultivating and deciding to advance to the Immortal Palace tier after a few days. However, a significant commotion suddenly swept through the demon quarters. He walked out, only to see the shock waves of battle in the distance. Regulations of light? Ling Han squinted his eyes. It was common for demons to battle against each other since the demon race was a naturally combative race. As long as these battles didn't result in disability or death, the Academy wouldn't stop them, either. Now, however, it was members of the angel race that were attacking. This was a rare sight. With the might of the heavenly venerates from both sides suppressing them, there was seldom any conflict between the two races, even though they weren't on friendly terms. Conflicts in the academy were even rarer. Ling Han walked over, planning to observe the situation. 3 angels had entered the demon quarters. They were grossly outnumbered. However, they weren't weak at all, and they were relaxed as they continued to advance. The demons were completely unable to stop them. "Brother, what's going on?" Ling Han asked the demon beside him. "These bastards are here to capture someone," the demon replied. "Capture whom?" Ling Han asked. "Someone called Ba," the demon replied without turning around to look at him. "Even though I don't know how Ba offended them, it's preposterous for angels to charge into the demon quarters, even if they're Wu Ye and Sun Feng." Ling Han was astonished. The culprit was actually himself? Wu Ye and Sun Feng? They were both at the 8th lotus. Moreover, disregarding Yu Yuan, they were the most powerful members of the angel quarters. "Yu Yuan didn't come?" he asked. "Yu Yuan." The demon shuddered upon hearing this. This was a name that instilled respect and reverence into everyone's mind. It was because of him that the 100 Battles Academy had managed to place 72nd out of the 1,000 academies. Even the demon race couldn't help but feel respect and reverence toward this person. Chapter 2308 Accidental Injury. Chapter 2308 Accidental Injury. "You're thinking far too highly of this Ba," the demon said with disdain. "How can he possibly offend Yu Yuan? They're not even on the same level." Just then, he had still been filled with righteous rage about the angels coming to attack the demons. Now, however, he was siding with Yu Yuan instead. Judging from this, it was extremely clear just how lofty a standing Yu Yuan enjoyed in the minds of these students. His reputation had already transcended the boundaries of race. He was a synonym for strength and power. Ling Han involuntarily smiled, and said, "Perhaps this Ba is also incredibly powerful. Perhaps he can even pummel Yu Yuan?" "Rubbish!" Not only did the demon beside him glare at him in anger, but even the dozen or so demons in the surroundings turned around to glare at him. They all wore expressions of disdain and disgust. Yu Yuan was like a god of the 100 Battles Academy. His name couldn't be sullied. "Why is this rubbish? After all, they haven't fought before," Ling Han said with a smile. His words naturally attracted even more rage. Many more demons turned around to glare at him, and it was as if they wanted to use their gazes to cut him into 10,000 pieces. "Huh!" Someone suddenly faltered before pointing at Ling Han and exclaiming, He's Ba! Ah! Everyone cried out in astonishment. Holy fuck! After speaking nonsense for so long, this was the culprit? Moreover, just how shameless was he? He was actually praising himself? Ling Han grinned and said, Those who think that I can pummel you on, please raise your hands. As expected, no one raised their hand. They all looked at him as if he were a retard. Bah! One of the angels roared. He immediately charged over. Pun pun pun! No one could block him, and his rippling holy glow made him appear like a spotless deity. My obedient son, Ling Han said with a nod. Oh, that's right, what were you called again, son? Papa forgot your name. The angel instantly flushed red with rage. This person was doing this on purpose, right? He had called himself Ba to take advantage of others. He humphed and said, I'm Lu Yuanxin. Fortunately, it's your heart that's green, not your head, Ling Han said with a serious expression. Lu Yuanxin had already been enraged, and this infuriated him even more. He was incandescent with rage as he lunged at Ling Han. Not a single demon stepped forward to help Ling Han. After all, he had dared to belittle Yu Yuan just then, so this caused all of them to detest him. Ling Han glanced up, and he immediately unleashed a terrifying killing intent. Lu Yuanxin was forcefully stopped in his tracks. Fear flashed across his face. He had a feeling that if he didn't stop, he would be ruthlessly killed by Ling Han. How is this possible? He was at the first leaf of the 8th lotus. According to his information, Ling Han was only at the 5th leaf of the 6th lotus. The gulf between them was like the gulf between heaven and earth. Even if he shut his eyes and allowed Ling Han to attack him at will, Ling Han still shouldn't be able to breach his defenses. Just where in the world was this feeling coming from? Ling Han smiled again and said, My good son, do you know that attacking Papa is extremely undutiful? Why don't you hurry up and kneel down and apologize? Lu Yuanxin forcefully suppressed the fear in his mind. He was convinced that Ling Han had cultivated some kind of special technique that targeted one's divine sense. It was because of this that he had mistakenly felt that Ling Han was powerful. In reality, he wasn't actually powerful. In any case, Ling Han had called him son time and time again, so he would definitely be laughed at by others if he didn't give Ling Han a wicked beating. You're seeking death, he roared as he unleashed an attack. Boom! A terrifying wave of energy swept forward. His wings flapped, and he immediately summoned 12 golden swords that stabbed down at Ling Han. Each sword was brimming with a devastating destructive power. A son is attacking his father. Absolutely traitorous, Ling Han shouted. He activated the void space, but he didn't summon tens of thousands of clones. Instead, he simply used his agility to dodge the attack. Boom! One of the golden swords had initially been stabbing at Ling Han, yet his disappearance was so sudden that Lu Yuanxin couldn't stop the attack in time. The golden sword instantly impaled the leg of the person behind Ling Han. The person immediately wailed in agony. At the same time, he glared at Lu Yuanxin in anger. Whom had he offended? Why had he suffered such misfortune? Lu Yuanxin grimaced upon seeing this. Charging into the demon quarters to cause a commotion was already against the academy rules. Now, he had even wounded someone for no reason. He was definitely going to face punishment. However, since it had already come to this, he naturally couldn't back down. He needed to severely punish Ling Han. He commanded the remaining 11 golden swords to continue pursuing Ling Han. Ling Han used the same tactic, activating the void space to vanish when the golden swords neared him. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Golden light flashed through the air, terrifying the surrounding demons. If they were stabbed, wouldn't that be the pinnacle of misfortune? Fortunately, Lu Yuanxin was prepared now, so he carefully controlled his swords to avoid the onlookers. He waved his hand with a humph, commanding the 11 golden swords to continue their pursuit of Ling Han. He's not getting tricked? Ling Han chuckled in his mind. You think it's this easy? When the sword shot over, he lightly parried one of them with his fingers while activating his void space to dodge. The sword instantly changed its trajectory, shooting toward a demon. Pooh! No one expected this sword to suddenly change trajectory, and the demon that it shot toward wasn't very powerful, either. He was instantly struck. Coincidentally, this was the same demon that had been struck before. Ah! He screamed in agony, and tears were about to fall from his eyes. This was not only from pain, but also from grief. They all said that sabers and swords had no eyes. However, to be struck twice? These swords clearly had eyes. They were as bloody accurate as could be. He stared at Lu Yuanxin in grief and resentment. Did the other party harbor some great hatred against him or something? Lu Yuanxin also felt unspeakable vexation. He had clearly targeted Ling Han, so it was definitely Ling Han's slight parry that had caused this. It was because of this that his sword had changed paths, and accidentally wounded someone. Fortunately, this also signified that Ling Han wasn't very powerful. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to dodge, and he could have parried more than one sword. He drew on his remaining power, and commanded the remaining 10 swords to continue pursuing Ling Han. You people! You're far too short-sighted, Ling Han said with a chuckle as he dodged Lu Yuanxin's attacks. You're convinced that Yu Yuan can't be rivaled? How laughable! If he's truly invincible, how did he only win 72nd place for the Academy? Impudence! Lu Yuanxin roared in wild rage. This person actually dared to slander Yu Yuan? He was seeking death. With a roar, his 10 golden swords instantly sped up. He had activated an ultimate technique and unleashed his pinnacle power. However, the price was his spiritual power being consumed 10 times quicker. This time, Ling Han didn't rely on the void space to dodge these attacks. Instead, he suddenly leaped back and dodged the attacks of all 10 swords. His sudden change in tactic was done such that Lu Yuanxin couldn't stop his attack in time. The 10 golden swords immediately shot toward the demon behind Ling Han. Ling Han was definitely doing this on purpose. The demon behind him was none other than the demon who had already been stabbed twice. His body was now filled with swords. Even though these swords had been formed from regulations, they would remain material for a short time. Moreover, they wouldn't dissipate until the power of regulations within them was exhausted. The demon glanced at Lu Yuanxin, and then he glanced at Ling Han. The words, "Holy fuck," were uttered from his mouth before he cocked his head and collapsed to the ground, unconscious. His gaze had been filled with grief and resentment. Why did Lu Yuanxin always target him? And why did Ling Han always stand in front of him, causing him to suffer such misfortune? Detestable! Lu Yuanxin was beside himself with rage. He furiously charged Ling Han. He was truly about to become a laughingstock. All 12 of his attacks had landed on an innocent bystander. Ling Han smiled faintly. He extended his right hand, using a single finger like a sword. With a slight flick, a burst of devastating sword chi slashed across the air. Its might was astonishing. In Chinese, the word for father can be read as Ba. In Chinese, Lu is the character for green, and Xian is for heart. Also, wearing a green hat means getting cucked. Chapter 2309 Tables Turned. Chapter 2309 Tables Turned. Ling Han used the heaven-destroying 9 swords, switching to the regulation of slaughter of the foreign realm to activate it. Sword chi danced wildly, power of regulation spreading out. This area instantly became extremely dangerous. Everyone in the surroundings stepped back to avoid being dragged into this disaster. It should be known that that person from before was a perfect example to learn from. Fuck. Everyone looked towards that unlucky fool. Because he had passed out, it was naturally impossible for him to leave, and now that he was dragged into the battle, the robes he was wearing were also torn into scraps, even exposing a flushed bottom. His tail was visibly drooping, and just happened to be lying between his legs, concealing the last bit of that inappropriate scene. Everyone exchanged looks, and thought that this guy was really ruined. Having mistakenly been struck by 12 sword strikes was already a huge joke, and now was forced to suffer the public exposure of his bottom. What face would he have left to continue staying here? Yet Lu Yuanxin's eyes were already bloodshot. He cared about nothing else now, and merely used ultimate moves to launch a flurry of relentless attacks on Ling Han. He summoned a sword of light. Its might was extremely terrifying, and the strike of light it delivered incited great dislike from the demon race. The power of light was contained within, which caused them to feel an instinctive dislike. Yet Ling Han was still unafraid. Recently, he had been recultivating the indestructible Heaven Scroll while making use of the power of the Origin Magic Cube. He had gained a deeper understanding of regulations, and even the power of heaven and earth that was superior to regulations, improving his physique further. But now that he had reached this stage, improving physique could no longer completely depend on comprehension. It was too slow. Instead, he would have to consume various kinds of natural treasures, and even fuse divine metal into his body, turning himself into a human weapon. Ling Han was still a great distance away from fusing divine metal into himself, but the resources he needed were still astonishing in amount. The Academy had supplied some, but it was far from reaching the amount that he needed. However, his present physique was more than adequate to deal with Lu Yuanqing. The two of them battled incredibly fiercely. The spectators of the demon race were more and more surprised. Though Ling Han had not gained an absolute upper hand, wasn't it said that he was only a 6th Lotus 5th Leaf cultivator? How could he be as powerful as this? Ling Han unleashed his battle prowess fully, and a 7th Lotus 9th Lotus appeared on his forehead. His cultivation level was clear to see. This was a monarch star. Everyone felt their scalps go numb. It should be known that even in a dimension like the foreign realm, the number of monarch stars was still extremely rare. For example, the 100 Battles Academy only possessed one, and that was Yu Yuan. Why did Yu Yuan have such a high status? A part of the reason was because of the glory he had won for the Academy, and another was his identity as a monarch star inspiring reverence from others. He was an existence that was destined to become an 18th Lotus ancestral king as long as he did not die before that. Who would not look up to him? No wonder this man had been so filled with confidence, considering even Yu Yuan below his notice. As a monarch star, he did indeed should have this kind of dominance. When this fact was uncovered, the attitude of a great many members of the demon race did an about-turn, switching from their previous disdain to heated fanaticism. They, too, had a monarch star now. Though they revered Yu Yuan, that was speaking in terms of the bigger picture. After all, they all belonged to the same academy, but if possible, how could it be that they did not hope that Yu Yuan was a member of the demon race? Of course, there was no way that Yu Yuan would become a member of the demon race, but now Ba had appeared, so they were naturally cheering and encouraging him. Who said that the demon race did not have any super geniuses? Humph! Wu Ye and Sun Feng both walked over. One of them was an 8th Lotus 7th Leaf, while the other was an 8th Lotus 8th Leaf. Their strength could be ranked in the top 10 of the Academy. There were no 3 people in the demon quarters that could stop them. At most, there were only 2. The problem was that neither of the strongest 2 of the demon quarters were here. One had ventured out on a training trip, while the other was breaking through his cultivation level somewhere. For this moment, where were they supposed to go and find them? Bah, you are too arrogant! Wu Ye stated evenly, yet his tone bore a frightening pressure, as if he was an emperor that was presently rebuking his subject. If a ruler demanded the death of his subject, the subject would have no choice but to die. That was how mighty and powerful he was. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "There is no father like that, nor can I manage to have a son as arrogant as you." Instantly, many members of the demon race spluttered in laughter. This guy had definitely named himself Ba on purpose. Whoever called his name would be at a disadvantage, and Ling Han would constantly be taking advantage of them. Wu Ye's expression was very dark. He humphed and said, "Spare the cheekiness. So what if you are a monarch star? In front of me, you will not even last a single blow." He paused, and then continued, "I have come today to issue you a warning. Stay away from Xing and the others. They are not someone that an ugly and coarse guy like you can covet." Hearing his words, everyone finally found that they had sought Ling Han out because of women. Sigh, as expected, even the mightiest heroes could not escape from the test of beauties. Ling Han shook his head. That is not up to you to say. Then you are asking for your own suffering. Wu Ye moved and grabbed out at Ling Han. Wu Ye, you have gone too far, an elite of the demon quarters declared in displeasure. He stretched out a colossal giant hand, blocking this attempted strike from Wu Ye. However, it was clear that his strength was inferior. Though he had blocked this strike, his body was uncontrollably trembling, with him stepping back continuously. He retreated at least 300 meters before finally stopping, and 2 lines of footprints were clearly left behind on the ground. Mutal, you dare stop me? Wu Ye demanded coldly, his eyes dark. You run over to our demon quarters, and dare to commit a crime. Do you think that there is no one in our demon race? That elite of the demon race, Mutal, retorted. Wu Ye and the others had barged in. If they were still allowed to just boldly strut out of here, what would be left of the pride of the demon race? Of course, if Ling Han was not a monarch star, he would not be protecting him with such great efforts either. Both Wu Ye and Sun Feng were well-known elites of the angel quarters. If he wanted to prevent them from committing violence, he would have to pay an exorbitant price. So what if you guys all attack together? Would you be any match for Sun Feng and me? Wu Ye demanded calmly. Muto was speechless. The other's words rang true. The gap in strength between them was too wide. 7th Lotuses were completely outmatched in front of Wu Ye and Sun Feng, and only 8th Lotus could be a match. But how many 8th Lotuses were there? Any 8th Lotus that could stay in the academy was a monarch tier, and there were at most 10 in a single academy. If they were divided equally over all the quarters, that would be 2 to 3 each. The demon quarters had 3. The 2 strongest had left the academy temporarily, and at present, the strongest one was him. If it was only Wu Ye or Sun Feng alone, he was confident that he could manage to stop them. After all, this was the academy. No matter how arrogant Wu Ye was, he would not dare to act rashly. However, if there were the 2 of them, he did not think he could stop them. He humphed. Do you think our demon race all have no backbone? Furthermore, where do you think this is, that you would be allowed to act so willfully and arrogantly? Wu Ye laughed loudly. If I told you that this brat actually dared to conspire against Yi Yuan's woman, would you still dare to protect him? What? Everyone was stunned. This Ba was really too outrageously bold, wasn't he? He actually dared covet Yi Yuan's woman? Moreover, your taste was too hardcore, wasn't it? You could actually make a move on a woman of the angel race? Ling Han was rendered speechless. This was really a complete distortion of the truth. It was clearly Yu Yuan that dared to have improper designs on his woman, yet they were accusing him of it. Anyone who dares to interfere further would be making an enemy of Yu Yuan. Wu Ye sneered, and grabbed out aggressively at Ling Han. Chapter 2310 Detained. Chapter 2310 Detained. Wu Ye moved, while Sun Feng simply stood, hands crossed behind his back. He exuded a terrifying aura that suppressed all of them, especially Mutal. Meanwhile, Lu Yuanqin looked intently at Ling Han, fear rising in his heart. Ling Han was actually a monarch star. What kind of concept was this? Not only did monarch stars have battle prowess that far surpassed monarch tiers that were their equal in cultivation level, they were faster at cultivation as well. This meant that Ling Han would be able to catch up with him in cultivation level very soon, and then easily suppress him. Moreover, as long as Ling Han did not die before that, he would be able to reach as far as 18th Lotus Ancestral King in future. Just what kind of noble, majestic existence was that? He very much hoped that Wu Ye would kill Ling Han, and forever get rid of this future problem. Ling Han humphed coldly, and summoned the divine demon's sword. Immediately, a cold light surged into the heavens, strong and severe. Instantly, Wu Ye withdrew and retreated, not daring to face the sharpness of the divine sword head-on. What kind of precious tool is this? How could it be so powerful? He paled in shock. Without even touching it, just feeling the sword light surging from it caused him to shiver all over. This kind of instinct was accurate. Otherwise, without even being directly struck by the divine demon's sword, just the slightest touch by sword chi, and he would be losing a few limbs. Sun Feng's expression also changed. Ling Han's battle prowess looked only to be at the 8th lotus second leaf, or third leaf, far from being a match for them. Even a monarch star could not possibly defy the heavens. But it was a different story with this sword added into the equation. The aura was too shocking, possessing might to overturn the heavens and earth. Ling Han stood with his sword, alone and proud. "If you want a battle, I will oblige," Ling Han stated evenly, his eyes set on Wu Ye, a frightening killing intent emanating from his gaze. Everyone felt their hearts grow numb, feeling the blood boiling in their veins and a strong urge to roar loudly. Wu Ye remained silent for a while, and then said, "Even with a god tool, so what? The gap between us is not something that a mere god tool could make up for at all. If you want to lose any limbs, just come on." Ling Han crooked a finger at him. Wu Ye sent out another palm strike, pressing down on Ling Han. He had spoken very calmly and easily, but the truth was he was extremely wary of the divine demon's sword, and did not even dare to close the distance for a battle at close quarters. Instead, with his higher cultivation level, he used spiritual power to condense into regulations, which turned into a colossal palm that descended on Ling Han. Ling Han brandished his sword in a slash. Shwa, this giant hand was split in two, and both halves passed on either side of him, unable to cause even the slightest sliver of damage to him. Fuck! Wu Ye frowned deeply. His full-powered blow had actually been so easily resolved by Ling Han. Then, their goal of capturing Ling Han and teaching this brat a good lesson today would be very hard to accomplish. Who would have thought that Ling Han would actually have such a terrifying god tool? "Looks like Yu Yuan will have to act personally." Sun Feng glanced at Wu Ye, and the two of them communicated this message through divine sense. Yu Yuan, the strongest elite of the 100 Battles Academy. Long ago, 1,000,000 years ago, when the 1,000 academies had battled fiercely, he had already been an 8th lotus 4th leaf. Now that 1,000,000 years had passed, no one knew the exact details of his cultivation level. They only knew that he was increasingly fearful, and even the likes of Sun Feng would not survive a single attack from him. If he moved, then even if Ling Han possessed a god tool, it would be useless. The latter would be easily suppressed. "Let's go!" Wu Ye declared. Lu Yuanxin was taken aback. They were going to leave just like that? They had come so aggressively, wanting to teach Ling Han a lesson, but they had just seen him, and they were going to call a halt? What were they playing around with here? It was all talk, no action. Wouldn't this just become a joke to others? But what could he do? Even Wu Ye and Sun Feng had given up. The three of them turned around, planning to leave. "Wait!" Noodle spoke up. "What place do you guys think this is? Somewhere that you can come and go just as you like? Then do you still want to invite us to dinner?" Sun Feng smirked. Ling Han held the divine sword, so they could not suppress him, but if they wanted to leave, how could it be that Ling Han would be able to detain them? Noodle's expression was dark. The two greatest elites of their quarters were not here, so it could be said that he was the representative of the demon quarters. Yet now such a matter had happened, and it was naturally him that would be feeling the most humiliated. He knew that he alone could not possibly stop Sun Feng and Wu Ye. It was not doable even with Ling Han added, but the fact that he could not accept even more was these three people would just strut boldly into the demon quarters for a roam, and then leave completely unscathed. "He has to stay," Noodle said, pointing at Lu Yuanxin. No matter what, he could not allow the three of them to withdraw completely unscathed. He had to detain at least one of them as an outlet for their fury. "In your dreams?" Lu Yuanxin sneered. He was also an elite that ranked in the top 10 of the academy. They wanted to detain him? Hee hee. "Is that right?" Ling Han moved while wielding his sword. In a flash, his figure had already appeared in front of Lu Yuanxin. His right hand balled into a fist, and he shot a punch at Lu Yuanxin. "How dare you!" Wu Ye moved as well, pressing out with his right hand. It turned into a massive mountain, wanting to stop Ling Han. Ling Han had long since been waiting for him. With a wave of his right hand, the divine demon's sword swept out in a strike. Shwa, that massive mountain formed of regulations was immediately slashed in two. In mere terms of destructive power, what could compare to the divine demon's sword? Sun Feng, too, roared in fury, and drew a bow. Though it was very old and damaged, it exuded a chilling aura. Xiao, he drew the bow and shot out an arrow, but Muto moved decisively, focusing his full power into a shield that blocked this arrow. It was not able to affect Ling Han. You have gone too far! Lu Yuanxin roared in fury. You faced Wu Yi on one side, and at the same time planned to take me down as well? Just how much are you looking down on me? It was not that he had not exchanged blows with Ling Han before. The battle prowess of both sides was almost on par. He countered strongly, wanting to make Ling Han know just how powerful he could be. Ling Han used Fists of Fury, and launched a barrage of attacks at Lu Yuanxin. What was Fists of Fury? Naturally, it was referring to strikes of fury, something related to emotion. If Ling Han was under normal circumstances, he would only be able to release about 70 to 80% of the true might of Fists of Fury, but now someone had an eye on his woman, and had come right to his doorstep to issue threats, so how could he not feel angry? Boom! Using Fists of Fury, it was as if Ling Han had turned into a great demon from the primitive age. Every punch carried supreme dominance. He was also like a crazed demon, and others would feel their hearts shudder and their legs go unsteady just at the sight of him. Lu Yuanxin was instantly suppressed. This time, Ling Han used his true strength. Multiple regulations surged out with astonishing might. Both Wu Yi and Sun Feng roared in fury, and wanted to rush forwards to save him. However, one of them was being detained by Muto, while the other was intimidated by the powerful weapon in Ling Han's hands, and did not dare to come closer at all. He could only watch helplessly as Lu Yuanxin was beaten down harder and harder. In merely a few hundred moves, Lu Yuanxin was subdued, and Ling Han held him up like he was holding a chick. Everyone was stunned. Though everyone knew that a monarch star was stronger than a monarch tear, there was still a major tear between the two of them, after all. No matter what, the two of them should have had an equal share of the limelight. How could they have known that Ling Han's evolution index had reached 10.9, whereas ordinary monarch stars were at 10? This meant that he was close to leaping out of the threshold of monarch stars. How could he not be strong? Both Wu Yi and Sun Feng stopped. Now that Lu Yuanxin had fallen into Ling Han's hands, there was no meaning for them to continue fighting. They both had ugly expressions. Though they themselves were completely fine, the three of them had entered the demon quarters together, and only two of them left in the end. If this spread out, it would naturally be a great humiliation. And all this was because of Ling Han. As expected of a monarch star. He was really too terrifying. If he was to break through to 8th Lotus, he would definitely be qualified to become a threat to Yu Yuan. Let's go! Neither Wu Yi nor Sun Feng stayed and continued to fight zealously. Now that things had reached this point, they might as well leave resolutely and decisively to prevent further humiliation. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.